I never thought I'd find myself in a battle of principles with someone I loved, especially over something that seemed so trivial at first, a project that I only half listened to during a late-night chat on our worn-out sofa. My boyfriend Ben had always been the type brimming with creativity, a hyperactive mind buzzing with the latest genius ideas that flitted in and out of his consciousness. I could barely keep up, often nodding along, knowing he thrived in that space of wild imagination. But to me, ideas were just that, dreams waiting for the right moment. I, on the other hand, was more grounded, living my life by what made sense, especially when it came to finances. One calm evening, however, things took a turn. Ben excitedly shared his latest brainchild, a subscription service for personalized jars of homemade pickles. He envisioned people worldwide, savoring his unique flavor combinations and being inspired by his passion for pickling. The enthusiasm in his eyes was infectious, but all I could muster was a hesitant smile. As he continued, the idea sounded more and more ludicrous. I knew Ben, he lacked the business acumen to even set up a proper website, let alone manage logistics. When he asked for a few $100s to kickstart this vision, my heart sank. It was the first real moment of pause for me, where I realized that this idea, which he held so dear, wasn't something I could support. I suggested a thorough business plan or some trial runs first, but Ben's face fell. He accused me of lacking faith in his genius, and my initial hesitation quickly spiraled into a profound sense of guilt. I loved him, yet I feared enabling a dream that might lead to heartbreak. Days dragged on, filled with awkward silences and unspoken words. I would lie awake at night, wrestling with my thoughts, wondering if I was truly the one in the wrong for considering the practicalities over his dreams. Did wanting reassurance make me an obstacle in his creative journey? Or was I simply protecting our future? Eventually, I proposed a compromise. We could allocate a small portion of our savings to conduct a few test runs, perhaps even host a local tasting event to gauge interest. The immediate relief on his face was unnerving, turning into an easygoing laugh, but it felt like I was pitching a half-hearted agreement to soothe my conscience. Yet, in the following weeks, I noticed something beautiful emerging when we collaborated. Ben, reinvigorated by purpose, immersed himself in researching recipes, and I even joined him in trying different methods, navigating the kitchen like a team. It became a bonding exercise of sorts, like stirring our love into each pickle jar, and slowly, anxiety morphed into excitement. Then came the day of the tasting event. I watched with bated breath as he presented his flavors to a small gathering of neighbors, friends, and onlookers. The joy on his face mirrored the glee of people who savored his pickles, and in that moment, I realized that my overarching fear of financial disaster paled in comparison to the happiness this endeavor brought us. I didn't need to abandon my principles, rather, I could support him while ensuring we tread carefully. The night ended in shared accolades and unexpected orders. The burst of laughter and shared dreams felt liberating. Reflecting on those moments, I learned that it wasn't just about my resistance to fund a failed endeavor, it was about navigating the balance between supporting creativity while honoring my grounded nature. In an ironic twist, a few months down the line, our pickle business, now affectionately named Ben's Brine, gained traction, drawing local vendors' interest, including a small deli that wanted to carry our products. While I still often struggled with the concept of financial risk, I began to appreciate the beauty of possibility. Still, I made a silent vow to remain cautious, ensuring that, while we dreamt big, our feet stayed grounded in reality. I realized love wasn't only about encouragement, it was also about clever navigation of ideas and support through practicality. Perhaps the struggle between imagination and reality was as indispensable as the flavors in our jars, melding into something uniquely our own. I would often smile at our journey, and one evening, after watching Ben meticulously pack orders, I felt an urge to share our story on Reddit, a blend of AITA and our /relationship sentiment swirling in my head. Am I the asshole for refusing to fund my boyfriend's genius idea? Seemed like a fitting title, but deep down, it transformed into a thread about two imperfect people forging a path together, where dreams and rationality coexisted in their own peculiar harmony. I pressed post and watched as comments poured in, eager to share our message of love and compromise with a world that might just need to hear it. As the comments started rolling in, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and trepidation. I found myself caught in a tide of responses, both affirming and questioning. Some users rallied behind my decision, calling it wise not to sink my savings into a risk that could lead to financial ruin. Others, however, championed Ben's creativity, urging me to believe in his vision, to have faith that sometimes the greatest risks yield the sweetest rewards. I leaned back in my chair, considering the dissonance of it all. Ben's genius idea, as he called it, was a subscription model for a quirky line of eco-friendly pet products. Think biodegradable chew toys and organic catnip laced with chamomile. The concept had merit and, more importantly to me, was a reflection of Ben's love for animals and commitment to sustainability, but the financial commitment weighed heavily on my mind. I imagined what it would be like to face our friends and family if everything went south. No one seemed to share the fantasy of becoming an overnight success, and I worried that my determination to be practical would be painted as lack of support for his dreams. That night, after reading through countless comments that felt like both validation and scrutiny, I sat on the couch while Ben scrolled through social media. I watched him, the light from the screen casting shadows that flickered across his face, and I felt a warmth surge in my chest. Beneath the layers of my doubt lay a deep love for him and a recognition of the immense effort he was putting into his idea. When he mentioned his plans for a booth at the local farmers market the next week, my heart sank. It felt like a band-aid being ripped off over a wound I hadn't fully addressed. I decided it was time to talk. Ben, can we chat for a minute? I asked, my voice wavering slightly. He paused, glancing at me with those bright eyes that exuded both hope and a hint of vulnerability. We sat together, our knees almost touching on that old, worn couch we'd picked up together from a thrift store. He watched me intently as I fumbled to find the words, my mind racing through all the implications and feelings. I want you to know that I admire what you're doing. Your passion for the eco-friendly concept is inspiring, I started gently, gauging his reaction. He nodded, a small smile breaking until I continued, but I'm really struggling with the idea of funding this venture. I let the words hang in the air, framing my concerns without diminishing his dreams. Ben shifted, his smile dimming slightly as he absorbed my words. I get that. I really do, he said, his tone steady but tinged with disappointment. But, you have to see it from my perspective too. This could be something great. I just need a little support to make it happen. As I watched him grapple with my reluctance, it struck me how deeply we were caught in this tangled web of aspirations and realities, and maybe, just maybe, if we navigated it together, we would find common ground. I took a deep breath, drawn back to the Reddit thread I had just posted. It dawned on me that my initial impulse to share our story didn't just stem from wanting to seek external validation. I wanted accountability, an open dialogue about pushing boundaries without losing oneself in the process. Okay, how about this? I proposed, choosing my words carefully. Instead of jumping into a financial commitment, what if we brainstorm some smaller steps? We could put together a prototype, seek local feedback, maybe even test the waters at the booth without significant investment. His eyes widened slightly, hope flickering back to life as he saw the possibility within my suggestion. Are you serious? He asked incredulously, a slight tremor in his voice. You'd help me build it? My heart warmed as I nodded, feeling the electric charge of connection radiate between us. Let's work on it together. You could need my help with the marketing side of things, and I believe we can find a middle ground. Relief washed over his features. There was still fear of the unknown lurking in the background, but I could see that he wasn't looking for unwavering support or financially empty promises. He just longed for partnership in a dream that felt elusive. As discussions progressed over the next few weeks, the feedback loop we created became a crucible for creativity, a rich, textured place where my pragmatism met his enthusiasm. This venture became a shared dream, steered away from the precipice of reckless abandon by our collective input. Meanwhile, my Reddit post continued to garner attention, with many users following along as I updated them about our small victories. We received encouragement and advice from strangers who rooted for us in our public yet intimate journey. One particularly heartwarming comment caught my eye: it's not about who's right or wrong. It's about two people growing together. It resonated with me deeply, and I found truth in those words. This was less an AITA situation and more a testament to how love balances dreams and reality in the most unexpected ways. As Farmers Market Day approached, we stood in the garage, putting together the last touches on our display. Ben's excitement was palpable as he unveiled the prototype, a brightly painted wooden barrel filled with the biodegradable toys he had crafted. There was a moment when he turned to look at me, his eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and exhilaration. I felt my heart swell as we posed for photos in front of our booth, laughter bubbling between us. It was in those moments I realized I wasn't just sharing a workspace, I was sharing his vision, and in doing so, I had learned how to celebrate the beauty of compromise. And when the market opened, feet shuffling and voices blending into an earthy symphony, we were overwhelmed with warmth from our community, a vibrant tapestry resulting in conversations that bridged strangers and friendships alike. The day was a success that unfolded before us, not just in sales but in connection and shared smiles. As we packed up, I wouldn't say we were out of the woods yet, but I finally felt aligned with Ben in our pursuit. The Reddit post still echoed in my mind, but now I didn't view it through the lens of whether I was the asshole. Instead, I realized that we were just storytellers, weaving our tale of love through uncertainty, faith, and ultimately, shared dreams. A few weeks later, I provided an update on the original post. After some soul-searching conversations, Ben and I found a way to support each other's dreams while still being practical about our finances. We're currently thriving at the farmer's market, learning and evolving together. Thanks for all the thoughtful insights. Everyone's input truly helped save our relationship. I felt the weight lift as I shared our growth, my heart full with the understanding that love, in all its messy beauty, often thrives in those gray areas. And in that swirling mix of vulnerability and perseverance, we realized we were navigating our path, together. But just as I settled into this rhythm, the future we had started building together began to feel less certain. The farmer's market had become our weekend ritual, a place where we showcased not only our homemade products but also our shared dreams. Each Saturday felt like a small victory. We laughed at customers' reactions, shared bites of homemade snacks with each other, and celebrated our modest earnings with a quick trip to the local cafe. However, as the weeks passed, I noticed that Ben seemed increasingly distracted. I could see the glimmer of ideas flitting behind his eyes, but instead of sharing them with me as he used to, he wrapped his thoughts in layers of secrecy. One evening, after a brisk day at the market, I caught him sketching ideas in his notebook, a faraway look casting shadows across his face. "Hey, what's going on in that head of yours?" I asked, attempting to bridge the distance that had begun to grow between us. He glanced up, surprise mingled with something that felt ominous. "Nothing. Just some ideas for the next phase of our venture," he replied nonchalantly, but I sensed an undercurrent of something deeper lurking beneath his surface. It was then that I felt my heart flutter with unease, and I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was brewing, and I was left without an umbrella. I pressed for more details, and with each question, I sensed him pulling further away, the bubble of excitement I had once felt about our relationship now punctured by simmering tension. After several days of half-hearted conversations, little truths began to unfurl like the petals of a flower refusing to bloom in harsh soil. One evening, over dinner, I took a leap. "Ben, I feel like we're not on the same page anymore. Are you really happy with how things are going?" The weight of my words hung between us, and his fork clattered against his plate. He looked at me, eyes wide, then opened his mouth to speak but quickly shut it again, glancing down instead. Finally, he let out a long breath. I've been thinking about expanding our business further than the market. There's a whole online community for what we do, and I want to tap into it." There it was, the floodgate had opened. His dreams were widening, and while that might seem beautiful, I felt a familiar turmoil rise in my chest. "That sounds amazing, but aren't we stretching ourselves too thin?" I asked, trying to mask the fear creeping in. "I mean, we barely have enough time as it is, and what about the risk? We can't just throw more money into something that might not work." His face hardened at my words, and in that moment, I felt the fragile balance we'd achieved begin to teeter. "I thought we were in this together. The whole point was to support each other," he replied, a hint of indignation sharpening his voice. As he spoke, I could see the flame of his ambition battling despair, but beneath it all, my own fear flared up in response. It felt like we were on two separate islands, and I couldn't even reach him on a bridge made of words. That night, I lay awake, replaying our conversation in my mind like a broken record. In just a matter of weeks, our quaint partnership felt strained under the weight of ambition and uncertainty. I found solace in the soft sounds of the nighttime world outside, crickets serenading me as I tried to quell my worry. The following days bore the weight of unspoken words, and our once lively market days morphed into a quiet ritual of forced smiles and muted laughter. Ben seemed more electric than ever, distant but burning with ideas that fed off my fears. I couldn't help but wonder if his vision for our business included a space for me at all. It took several days of silent simmering before I reached a breaking point. One Saturday, during a lull between customers at the market, I confronted Ben again. "What if we come up with a clear plan together, instead of you going ahead solo? I want to support you, Ben, but I need to feel included in what we're building. Your dreams matter to me, but so does our partnership." His gaze met mine, piercing yet unsure, and I held my breath. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire ready to snap. Slowly, realization seemed to dawn upon him. the anger fading just a little to expose a flicker of understanding. I guess I didn't consider how my ambitions have started to push us apart. I was so focused on getting ahead that I forgot why we started this together in the first place. I felt a swell of relief wash over me, as if a heavy curtain had been drawn back, allowing sunlight to seep into the stifling darkness of my worries. After that, something shifted between us. Ben began including me in his brainstorming sessions, drafting plans together late into the evening, and for the first time in weeks, I felt my enthusiasm reignite. We created a strategy that both respected his dreams and acknowledged our limitations, crafting a delicate dance between risk and reward. As we navigated our way through that process, it became clear that this journey wasn't just about individual aspirations but about weaving our dreams together, one thread at a time. With renewed energy, we launched our online store, balancing our market presence with the new venture. Month by month, sales grew, ideas flourished, and miraculously, so did our relationship. It wasn't without its bumps. Some nights ended in frustration when technology failed us or when we faced competition that made us second-guess our approach, but we learned to communicate through the challenges instead of around them. In those moments of doubt, we would often revisit that original post I had shared on Reddit, the one that had stirred so much conversation and reflection. It became a reminder of the messy and beautiful journey we were on. Our different facets started to harmonize, turning discord into a beautiful melody that felt uniquely ours. Eventually, as I looked back on that time, I realized the power of love not only to lift us up but to ground us in the essence of who we are. Our experience at the farmer's market became not just a business endeavor but the backbone of our relationship, a shared narrative where our hopes intertwined like the strings of a well-played instrument. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to the soft rhythm of Ben's breathing next to me, I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for the lessons learned and the love that continually shaped us. It wasn't about avoiding the storms but dancing together in the rain, finding joy in the journey and in one another. I remember the morning of my first job interview as if it were yesterday, a mix of excitement and dread swirling inside me like a storm waiting to break. Fresh out of college, I was desperate for my first big break, the kind of opportunity that would finally let me escape the confines of my parents' house, where the walls seemed to echo with expectations and every conversation felt more like an interrogation. I had settled into the interview office, a room perfumed with the faint scent of peppermint and polished wood, the kind of place where dreams were supposed to begin but often fizzled into disappointments. My interviewer, a middle-aged man named Mr. Henley, had a warm smile that immediately put me at ease, or at least as at ease as one could feel when the weight of one's future hung in the balance. As he flipped through my resume, he made small talk, commenting on my university experiences, and I felt a strange sense of connection. We laughed over shared memories of late-night studying and caffeine overloads. Yet, as the questions turned serious, I began to feel the undertow of tension, as if our pleasant exchange was concealing a rapidly rising tide. The questions grew increasingly rigorous, probing into my past experiences, and that's when I noticed it, the subtle red flags that flickered in the depths of his expressions. A tightness around his eyes when I mentioned my volunteer work, a barely noticeable sigh when I talked about my time in group projects. I brushed it off at first, thinking I was simply reading too much into things. After all, this was just an interview, right? But as I articulated my vision for the future and the contributions I believed I could make to his organization, I caught a flicker of disappointment cross his face, as though I had disappointed him before I even began. The day soon morphed into an unexpected display of emotional vulnerability as I detailed my volunteer experiences, explaining how they shaped my views on teamwork and leadership. Mr. Henley nodded along, but there was a waning enthusiasm in his body language, an almost imperceptible retreat that made my heart sink. Somewhere inside, I suddenly felt the urge to justify myself, to explain why my life was a patchwork of different ventures rather than the linear path he seemed to be hoping for. The interview dragged on, each question exposing the gulf between what I thought he wanted to hear and what I needed to say. I could sense the distance growing with each passing moment, and as I exited the office, I wondered if I had left a piece of myself behind, if perhaps I had seemed too disorganized in a world that revered neat, clean lines. Days passed, each waking moment overshadowed by a gnawing doubt about my future, until finally, I received the email I had both dreaded and anticipated. "Thank you for your application," it started, and my heart sank further as words like regret and fit screamed at me from the screen. I spent that evening wallowing in self-pity, questioning my approach and feeling the weight of my perceived failures, replaying the interview in my mind over and over again. But there, amidst the waves of despair, a simple realization began to surface. I had been so preoccupied with their expectations that I had lost sight of my own identity. Slowly, I started crafting my narrative in my head, embracing the idea that my journey didn't have to mirror others' journeys to be valid or worthwhile. It was a winding path, a landscape of lessons learned, which would ultimately prepare me for opportunities that truly resonated with my spirit. I began applying for more positions, shifting my focus onto companies whose values aligned with my own. The healing was gradual but vital. I delved into further volunteering, enhancing my skill set, and forming connections that felt genuine. The process felt less like a chore and more like a journey, with growth nestled in every bump along the road. Finally, after weeks of uncertainty and with a renewed sense of purpose, I received a call from another firm, a startup with a mission that spoke directly to me. I didn't just want to rush into this new opportunity. For the first time, I felt equipped to be myself, to genuinely convey my experiences and beliefs. This time, when I stepped into the interview, the air felt different, and rather than presenting a facade, it was just me and my authentic journey. The room radiated warmth, and while the questions were still probing, I was met with shared smiles and nods of understanding. As I walked out, I felt a calm triumph wash over me, knowing that I had given my story wings. It was about much more than the job, it was a sincere expression of who I was, and I realized that discovering the right fit was about more than avoiding red flags, it was about embracing the search for places where my passions could thrive. Update: it's been a couple of months since I started my new job, and I can't express how right it feels. I've learned that the most significant red flags aren't just in the interviewers but often lie in the disconnect between who we think we should be and who we truly are. I've also developed a friendship with Mr. Henley, who reached out to offer me an unexpected opportunity to collaborate on a community project. Sometimes, paths cross in unexpected ways, and I've come to appreciate the beauty of my winding journey, ready for whatever lies ahead. As I sat in my cozy living room, the soft light of the setting sun casting golden hues across the walls, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come since that pivotal day. The little project Mr. Henley proposed had started as a simple idea, a community mural to bring the neighborhood together, but it blossomed into something far more meaningful. We gathered a lively group of people, each with their unique stories and talents, and before I knew it, the vibrant colors we splashed onto the canvas didn't just represent our individual identities but wove together a tapestry that reflected the spirit of our community. Each stroke of paint was a conversation, a connection, a laugh shared over pizza and cans of soda, with old men telling stories of yesteryear as young children splattered paint with joyful abandon. Those evenings became my sanctuary, a place to recharge away from the stresses of work, and I found myself forming relationships that felt genuine and enduring. As the weeks passed, I noticed Mr. Henley becoming a great friend, offering support and guidance, but also a touch of mystery. He had an ease about him and an otherworldly way of navigating challenges that left me in awe, yet sometimes I caught glimpses of a deeper layer within him, like shadows lingering just beneath a bright surface. One Friday evening, as we took a break to admire the burgeoning mural, I mustered the courage to ask him about himself. The way he paused, looking off into the distance as if weighing his words, left me both intrigued and anxious. Eventually, he shared snippets of his life, starting with his earlier days as a graphic designer to his decision to forsake the corporate grind for passion projects. In the midst of his tale, there was a mention of overcoming personal demons, a fleeting reference that seemed to deepen the shadows in his eyes. Over time, an unspoken bond formed between us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't revealing everything. Perhaps it was my experience from the past, where I'd seen the divide between what people presented and the truths they often hid, but the subtle red flags flickered like weak lights in the back of my mind. There was a day, certain in my conviction, when I stitched together my courage and invited him to share more. He regarded me with a smirk, the kind that held 1,000 secrets, and eventually began to talk about the time he spent in a creative retreat that pieced his life together after an emotional collapse. Part of him had always felt out of place, a wanderer searching for a purpose, yearning for acceptance. But as he allowed me a glimpse into his past, I began to sense weight behind those words, a history not just of passion but of scars that still would flare up uninvited. That night, under a velvety sky spattered with stars, I felt a strange sense of kinship with Mr. Henley. We were both navigating these paths toward healing and authenticity, albeit in different ways. Yet, I couldn't ignore my instincts forever, and the next week I overheard snippets of conversation during our group sessions, words that seemed at odds with the harmonious creation we were cultivating. Some participants whispered about how Mr. Henley had a reputation for getting close to those he saw talent in, only to shift their focus elsewhere, leaving them feeling abandoned. It nagged at me, The thought that everything I cherished about the project was somehow entangled in an imbalance I couldn't yet comprehend. Feeling the pressure bubble inside me, I sought solace in my journal. Pouring my thoughts onto the pages as if to unravel the knotted threads of confusion. Were these cautionary tales true? Did my intuition speak of parallel realities, one where we completed this mural together in camaraderie and another where I would find myself tangled in the remnants of trust misplaced? The emotional roller coaster of creating art intertwined with the intrigue surrounding Mr. Henley served as both my safe haven and a source of restlessness. I was in love with this newfound freedom, the ability to express who I truly was, but how could I reconcile that love with the gnawing uncertainty that lingered when I interacted with him? Then came the turning point. During one of our collaborative afternoons, as we painted amidst laughter and music, I noticed Mr. Henley hovering a little too close to one young artist, a girl bursting with potential and eager to impress. The way he offered suggestions, his gaze lingering longer than it should have, stirred something primal within me. I pushed down the tightness in my chest and concentrated on my work, focusing on the colors I was mixing, but it was hard to ignore the growing rumbles of jealousy that pulsed through me. Later that week, I decided it was time to have a straightforward conversation. I invited Mr. Henley to grab coffee after our mural session. My heart pounded as the words piled up in my throat. Sitting across from him in the cafe, the aroma of brewed coffee enveloping us, I looked down into my cup, the steam swirling and curling into the air. Mr. Henley, I began, fighting the tremor in my voice, I want to talk about the project and how we navigate friendships within it. I saw curiosity spark in his eyes, and as I poured out my concerns, I expected some form of acknowledgement, but instead, he leaned back, arms crossed, with that infuriating smirk gracing his lips. You know, he said, sometimes it's easy to form connections when we believe the narrative we tell ourselves. But how often do we step back and realize it's just a story we create? Maybe your fears are just remnants of your old job. Let go of those preconceptions and enjoy the ride. His words sliced deeper than I anticipated. As I wrestled with the truth of it, I recognized that he had a point. I was holding tightly to insecurities, a product of a fear-laden past, while he seemed to tread with intention. Yet the shadows returned, turning the warmth of camaraderie into a cold unease. The conversation hung like stale air around us until he reached across the table, his hand atop mine, grounding me. In that moment, I chose to trust my instincts and release the tension gnawing at my gut. Let's realign our focus, I finally suggested, my pulse racing. From now on, let's engage everyone equally. Nobody's story should be sidelined. A flicker of something danced across his eyes, perhaps surprise or contemplation, and he finally smiled, though I sensed the undercurrent of a challenge. All right, he acquiesced, but we'll need to be mindful not to lose the spark. And with that agreement, I felt a renewed sense of hope settle within me, the decision to clear the ambiguous shadows, forging ahead with both clarity and purpose. As the mural neared completion in the weeks that followed, I found a rhythm of joy reverberating through the community, fueled in part by the newfound understanding among us. Mr. Henley and I became partners not just in the art but also in fostering honest conversations, cultivating an environment of trust, and drawing out the best in those around us. There was magic in the unexpected twists of our journey, a reminder that while red flags can signal caution, they can also unlock profound lessons about ourselves and others. As I looked around at the vibrant mural, realizing it represented not only our individual contributions but also the resilience of teamwork and understanding, I understood fully that my path was no longer obscured by shadows. Every winding road had led me here, ready to embrace whatever came next, eager as always to evolve alongside those whom I once perceived as mere acquaintances and who had, through the power of vulnerability and connection, transformed into lifelong friends. As I stood there, taking in the vibrant hues of the mural, the laughter and chatter of my colleagues floated through the air like a gentle breeze, warm and inviting. The colors seemed to dance in harmony with the embodiment of what we'd created together, a testament to our shared struggles and triumphs, each stroke representing a story, a lesson we all carried with us. Not long ago, I had felt adrift, questioning everything about my career and the person I was becoming, and now I found solace in the knowledge that I had surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared. Mr. Henley, with his chronically optimistic disposition and a knack for bringing out the best in everyone, had become a source of inspiration for me. His dedication to the project had opened a window into my own capabilities, encouraging me to explore not just my creative side, but my leadership potential as well. Together we had coordinated workshops that brought the community in to participate, allowing families to paint alongside us, sharing their hopes and dreams in splashes of color. With every paintbrush stroke, I witnessed strangers transform into friends, forging connections that would bridge gaps created by years of indifference. I remember one particular day when a young girl, no older than 8, approached me with wide eyes filled with wonder. "Can I help with your mural?" she asked, her fingers stained with shades of green and blue. I knelt down to meet her gaze, feeling a warmth swell in my chest, and said, "Of course. What do you want to paint?" She thought for a moment and declared, "A huge butterfly. One that can carry all our dreams." I glanced over at Mr. Henley, who was intently focused on the section of the wall behind me, his kind smile betraying the pure joy he felt at witnessing this exchange. That day was a reminder of the unanticipated revelations life can bring, what it means to hope and dream, and I made a point to ensure that the little girl's butterfly was as bold and colorful as her spirit, a new red flag of promise fluttering high amid life's uncertainties. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself not just growing in my new role, but stepping into a version of myself I never thought possible. I shared dinner with colleagues after long days at work, engaging in conversations that stretched far beyond mere small talk. We debated the best pizza toppings, laughed at our rookie mistakes in the early weeks of the project, and even shared our fears about the future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an ethereal glow over the city, I found myself at a small rooftop gathering. With laughter punctuating the crisp air, I felt a growing connection, and somehow, everyone there felt like family. It struck me then, the red flags of my past had been an invitation to reevaluate, and here, I was surrounded by love and support, reaffirming that each twist and turn had sculpted a life that felt richer, more meaningful. But it wasn't just the mural or the friendships that grounded me, it was the conversations I would have with Mr. Henley about vulnerability and authenticity. He would often sit across from me, coffee mug in hand, creating space for deep discussions about our journeys. "You know," he'd say, his eyes twinkling with insights, "it's easy to focus on the flaws of others during interviews, but sometimes we forget to reflect on our own fears and insecurities that block us from seeing their true potential." I found comfort in his words, realizing that while job interviews aim to decipher a person's capabilities, they were equally a challenge for the candidate to embrace their own truth. Those reflections continued to shape my personal narrative, leading me toward resilience and understanding. I was often reminded of a quote I had once dismissed as cliché: "The only way to do great work is to love what you do." Only now did it resonate with wisdom, vibrating with the essence of community, connection, and finding joy amidst uncertainty. The mural, now a collaborative masterpiece, stood proudly as a symbol of that journey, telling of creativity birthed in friendship and the magic that emerges when we choose to let down our walls. As I indulged in that realization, I knew that the next chapter of my life was open for exploration. My mind wandered to the next community project Mr. Henley and I had been brainstorming, an arts festival that would showcase not only shared artistic expressions but also foster mentorship in the local youth. I could hardly wait. The thrill of possibility rushed through me, invigorating my spirit with hope and excitement for what lay ahead. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly aligned with my purpose, fully aware that every winding road had led me here, to this moment of connection, creativity, and clarity. Looking toward the future, I welcomed the unexpected, accepting that sometimes the most beautiful journeys unravel from the red flags we choose to face with courage and grace. It's funny how a single moment can change everything, especially when you've poured your heart and soul into something that ultimately feels like a grand betrayal. I've been a dedicated fan of the show Through the Veil since its first season, drawn in by the intricate world building and the intricate relationships between characters. Each week, I'd gather with my small circle of friends, popcorn in hand, eagerly speculating about plot twists and character arcs. The show was more than just a pastime for us, it was a tapestry where our own experiences wove into the complex narratives playing out on our screens. But then came the final season, a season that was supposed to tie up years of storytelling in a satisfying bow. Instead, it felt like the showrunners had taken a megaphone to our cherished theories and shouted, "We don't care." I still remember the day the finale aired, a mix of excitement and dread swelling in my chest. As the hours approached, I could feel the electricity running through our group chat, with everyone sharing their thoughts, their hopes for the characters they had come to love as much as old friends. However, as the credits rolled on what was supposed to be our grand finale, I sat in stunned silence, my friends too, eyes wide. The plot had twisted in the most bewilderingly unsatisfactory manner, characters acted entirely out of character, beloved story arcs were abandoned, and the core relationships that had developed over several seasons were discarded like yesterday's news. It felt personal, like the creators had flipped the bird to all the fans who had invested emotionally and financially in the series. I spent that entire night tossing and turning in bed, the disappointment gnawing at me. Everyone else seemed to shrug it off, chalking it up to artistic freedom, but I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. I finally decided to write an impassioned letter to the network, pouring my heart out about the discontent amplifying among the fanbase, wondering if they understood the consequences of their choices. Deep down, I knew it was just a show, but as I watched my friends spark up the next day about a different series, a hollow feeling settled in. I had hoped that my voice could spark some change, or at least get a response, but instead, I got silence, and I felt simultaneously mature and ridiculous for having staked a part of my identity on a fictional narrative. The punch to the gut feeling persisted for weeks. One evening, I found myself at a local cafe tucked away from the world, nursing a cup of herbal tea, when I overheard two baristas discussing their own feelings about the episode. They were joking about how they had been let down, but their banter soon spiraled into what those characters could have done differently. I felt an unfamiliar camaraderie. Leaning over, I pitched in with my own thoughts, and soon the conversation grew like wildfire, echoing our group's frustration but freeing me from my solitude. People I had never met were validating my feelings, and it struck me that perhaps I wasn't alone in my disillusionment with the show. I posted on a fan forum, seeking a space to air my grief, and found a chorus of voices just as disappointed. We shared theories that could have salvaged it all, and gradually, the weight of disappointment began to lift as we created our own alternate endings. It became therapeutic. Instead of focusing on the betrayal, we forged new paths for the characters and laughed together about the absurdity of it all. Each day brought fresh creativity, a collection of plot lines that would ironically remind us why we loved the show in the first place. In the end, though through the veil stumbled, a community emerged, stronger than any one individual, allowing us all to heal and find joy elsewhere. Reflecting on that time, I realized that sometimes the biggest middle finger to fans is just an opportunity, a prompt to explore why those stories mattered so much and to create new worlds together in their absence. Update: a few months later, I was authentically surprised when the showrunners announced they'd be revisiting the series with a special episode based on fan submissions. My heart raced, the mixture of hope and skepticism washing over me, but this time, I approached it differently. Whatever dark corner the show might lead me down, I could, at least, revel in my creative escape. As I settled into my dimly lit living room, clutching a steaming mug of chamomile tea, I could feel a blend of excitement and trepidation coursing through me. After the initial uproar and disappointment regarding the show's abrupt end, the announcement of a special episode rekindled a flicker of the passion I once felt for the characters I had followed through thick and thin. The past months had seen me diving headfirst into fan fiction, sketching scenes, and reconstructing plots that breathed new life into the narrative universe. Each late-night writing session became a refuge, a place where my frustrations transformed into vibrant tales colored with hope and nostalgia. However, the thought of the showrunners finally acknowledging their fanbase left me second-guessing my feelings. Would they genuinely listen to the voices of those who felt overlooked, or would this be another misstep, a tempting distraction that carried the same bitter aftertaste? The day arrived when we were told to submit our ideas, and the excitement spiraled into a backdrop of anxiety. I poured out my heart into a story that melded my favorite plot lines, reuniting characters who, in my mind, deserved a second chance, a reunion that carried the weight of unfulfilled promises. I let minutiae roll off my fingers, building landscapes of gripping emotion and unraveling paths that had left me bewildered. The submission deadline passed like a soothing lullaby, and as I waited, I absorbed every drop of hope and doubt that floated into my thoughts. Days blended together, every ping of my phone sent my heart racing, yet returned only updates from friends speculating about the direction of the episode. Months flew by, and at moments I found myself buried under blankets and memories, ruminating about how I might feel when the episode finally aired. Would my favorite characters retain their essence, or would they fall victim to the very fickleness of storytelling I had tried to escape? The day of the premiere arrived like a potent storm, electric and surreal. I paused for a moment at the entrance of my living room, feeling the weight of nostalgia pressing against my chest. I switched on the television, and the familiar theme song echoed, a haunting reminder of what once captivated me. As I watched, the screen danced with images I had hoped for, my submissions were woven like threads into an intricate tapestry, and I felt immersed in the warmth of a familiar hug. In a peculiar yet satisfying turn, they blended fans' narratives seamlessly with their own, elevating the original story while paying homage to what sparked the love in the first place. Each twist, every dialogue sparked joy within me, igniting childhood dreams that lingered just beneath the surface. In true storytelling fashion, the creators took risks that felt authentic, where humor intertwined with heartbreaking moments. I could feel my heart racing in tandem with the characters' journeys. Their growth compelled me, igniting a fierce desire to cheer for them all over again. When the credits rolled, I finally exhaled, realizing I didn't just witness the episode, I had partaken in a celebration of community and creativity, a shared understanding that transcended mere entertainment. It was an articulation of everything I had yearned for, dreams woven collectively, which I thought might only ever exist in my notebooks. In the aftermath, I felt lighter as I tossed around ideas among my friends about potential next chapters for the characters. We laughed and critiqued, built and deconstructed narratives with warmth and intimacy, reclaiming the stories in our own ways. The series, which once felt like a betrayal, transformed into a collaborative playground, each suggestion revealing connections that knitted us closer together. As the days turned into weeks, I embraced those feelings of nostalgia without the suffocating grip of bitterness. Instead, I chose to revel in the journey. Looking back on everything, I realized how a supposed middle finger from creators spawned a rich exploration of passion, friendship, and creativity in reclaiming something profoundly shared. I realized, too, that sometimes the stories we hold dear can slip through our fingers, but are never truly lost. They morph into something new, vibrant, and alive, waiting for us to dive back in, ink new tales on blank pages, and create together, like we did. And with that realization, the darkness that once clouded my vision faded, offering a glimpse of endless possibility. Perhaps we are the architects of our stories, even if they're borrowed from the flicker of a screen or the ink of another's pen. With that realization simmering in my heart, I dove into the fan submission process with a mixture of enthusiasm and trepidation. The online forum had become a whirlwind of creativity, buzzing with ideas that both thrilled and terrified me. I spent hours reading how others interpreted the beloved characters, the settings, and the overarching themes that had captivated us, trying to find that spark within myself while grappling with the weight of expectations. Each submission echoed the pads of 1,000 eager feet, pushing against the gates of our collective nostalgia, and I found myself swept up in the wave of brainstorming sessions with my friends. We would gather in my small apartment, the dim light of string lights casting playful shadows on our faces as we combed through our notes and storyboards. We laughed, cried, and sometimes argued over character arcs and plot twists, but at the end of the night, it didn't matter who was right or wrong. We were creating together, breathing life into the void left behind by the showrunners, who had so abruptly disregarded our efforts. Eventually, I decided to submit a story that centered around a character who had long been a point of contention in the series. Once hailed as the most compelling part of the narrative, her disappearance in the latter seasons left many fans disheartened. It felt like a betrayal to cast aside such a rich and vibrant character, and so I chose to give her a tale of resilience and rediscovery, one where she stumbled upon a forgotten part of the world that held echoes of her past adventures. I could see her standing atop a cliff, reminiscent of the courage she had always shown, gazing out upon a vast horizon. Crafting her journey led me to confront my own feelings of abandonment, to explore what it meant to be loyal to something that seemed to have moved on without us. Weeks passed in a flurry of submissions from fans across the globe, a tapestry woven from the threads of different imaginations. I kept checking the updates on the show's fan page, each announcement stoking the fires of anticipation and anxiety. Finally, the moment arrived, the day they would unveil the chosen fan submissions that would shape the special episode. I sat in my living room, surrounded by crumpled pages and used coffee cups, feeling as if the walls were tightening around me as I waited for the announcement. When the clock struck noon, chills crept up my spine, the live stream began to fill my screen, the familiar logo flashing before my eyes like an old friend I had almost forgotten. As the showrunners shared their gratitude for the outpouring of creativity from fans, my heart pounded anxiously in my chest, each beat a reminder of how vulnerable this experience had made me. They began revealing the titles of the chosen stories, and each name echoed my growing hope, a series of breaths caught in my throat. My fingers tingled with disbelief when the host announced my submission, and for a moment, I felt suspended in time. The world outside faded away, the disgrace of the past replaced by a sense of belonging and validation. I had poured myself into those pages, and now, here I was, about to see my words transformed into a living, breathing segment of a universe that once seemed out of reach. The special episode was set to air a month later, but what lingered longer than the excitement was a profound shift within me. I had realized, through the act of creation, that storytelling possesses an innate power, one that connects people across their myriad experiences and fragmented relationships. I had become part of a community that thrived on shared passion, rebuilding something we loved from the ground up. The day the episode finally aired felt almost ceremonial. I gathered my friends once more, this time transforming my home into an impromptu viewing party, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of popcorn. As the episode unfolded, I watched with bated breath. The familiar score began, and with it, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. My heart swelled as my character emerged on screen, her story intertwining beautifully with the beloved narrative threads that had initially captivated us. It was as if our plans had harmonized with the creator's vision, creating something richer and deeper than any single contribution. I realized then that this moment wasn't about vindication, it was about reconciliation, not just with the creators, but with myself, my journey, and the stories I still carried within. And as I sat there, surrounded by laughter and joy streaming through every corner of my living room, it struck me that every ending leaves a space for new beginnings. The series had re-entered my life, not as a hollowed-out remnant of the past, but as a vibrant pulse that beat among us again. It was a gentle reminder that while stories may wane, their essence never truly fades. In our hands, they can always take flight once more. Update: in the weeks following the episode, an unexpected camaraderie blossomed between the fans, the showrunners, and even the actors who began to engage with us once more on social media. It felt invigorating to share in a collective appreciation, to dissect plot twists and character developments alongside those who once felt like strangers. The show had transformed into a collaborative creation, and, as someone who once felt on the outside, I finally felt at home. Together, we filled the void with renewed passion, with a promise that even when our favorite narratives twist unexpectedly, it's up to us to keep pouring our hearts into new stories, continuing the legacy of something we cherished. In the end, my biggest takeaway? That sometimes, the middle finger turns to a high five, and the stories we love are as much ours as they are the storytellers, ever evolving, ever bright. It all started on a rainy Thursday when I found myself staring at my phone, contemplating whether I should answer the call from Jamie. Jamie and I had been best friends since childhood, our lives woven together like the strands of an old tapestry. He was the kind of person who wore his heart on his sleeve, and while I admired him for that, it often led to the kind of emotional labors that I sometimes felt ill-prepared to navigate. The thing is, I owed him $60 from a bet we placed 3 months prior. At the time, it felt like a good idea. He had bet I wouldn't see a specific movie in theaters, a kind of absurd challenge we often entertained to pass the time. I had pulled through and watched it, laughing at how easily I'd won. But life had a funny way of making one's priorities feel scattered, and with each passing month, that small debt lingered in the back of my mind, like a familiar yet annoying itch I couldn't quite reach. As I sat on my couch, the rain beating against the window, I felt an odd sense of dread. Jamie had been talking about his financial struggles lately, how his part-time job didn't cover his rent or his bills, and I could feel the weight of that call pressing against my chest. I hesitated for a moment, finally picking up the phone, but the conversation wasn't what I anticipated. Instead of the usual banter, Jamie launched into a heartfelt rant about how he felt completely overwhelmed by the world. It was like listening to a dam break, all his frustrations flowing out as he told me about the suffocating weight of his responsibilities. As he spoke, I felt my stomach twist into knots. How could I ask him to let go of this trivial debt when he was clearly in pain? "Look, Jamie, I just need to say something," I interrupted hesitantly. "I know I owe you that $60, but with everything going on, can we just let it slide for now?" I could hear the silence on the other end, how the weight of my words sank into the atmosphere, and I could almost picture his brow furrowing in contemplation. Finally, he spoke, and there was a tremor in his voice. "You know, I really need that money, though." My heart sank deeper. I wanted to help him, but the truth was, my own finances weren't exactly stable. It felt selfish to hold on to my money, but asking him for patience felt equally wrong. Days turned into weeks, and our conversation echoed in my mind like a haunting melody. I could see Jamie's disappointment flash across my memory, see the disbelief etched into his features, and the burden of guilt settled firmly on my shoulders. I tried to reach out, perhaps offering to treat him to coffee or something small to remind him that I cared, but our meetings became fewer as he threw himself into extra shifts. Just as I was spiraling into my own feelings of guilt, Jamie reached out once more, but this time, there was an edge to his voice that set me on alert. He wanted to meet up, and with that, I felt a sense of impending doom settle over me. Did he want to discuss the money again, or was there something else brewing beneath the surface? The anxiety was palpable inside me, it was almost a physical thing, weighing heavy on my chest as I approached the cafe we frequented. When I arrived, He was already seated at our usual table, fidgeting with his phone, looking tangled up in thought. I slid into the seat and gave him a small smile, which he returned with a nod that seemed devoid of any real warmth. "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation," he began, his voice steady but lacking its usual enthusiasm. "That money. It's not just about the money for me. It feels like a lack of respect, like you don't value our friendship." The words hit me like a slap, and I felt my chest constrict with shame. I started to defend myself, but I could hear the raw hurt in his voice, and my mind raced to find the right words that wouldn't sound like empty excuses. "I thought maybe since things were hard for you, we could let it slide." His gaze was piercing, and I could almost see the crumbling pieces of our history floating between us. The conversations we used to have, the laughter we shared, now felt grim and fragile, like the remnants of a dream slipping away. "But it's not just about the money, it's the principle," he pressed, emotion layered in each word. I could sense the anger rising, and a part of me wanted to retreat, but I owed it to both of us to engage. "Jamie, it's not that I don't care or value you. I'm trying to navigate my own life too. What if I'm struggling in my own way, just like you?" The moment hung heavy, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in his armor begin to show. "I didn't realize you felt that way," he admitted, his voice low, the fight momentum suddenly dulled. I could see the realization wash over him, just as much as it flooded me. Perhaps I wasn't the only one struggling with insecurities masked as arrogance. In the days that followed, we both took a step back, breathing in the unease of our friendship and beginning to stitch it back together with more understanding. I did pay him back the 60. I realized that money was only one part of the equation. What mattered more was the open dialogue we finally had, the clarity that settled between us, allowing both our vulnerabilities to emerge. This experience transformed our friendship. It was no longer about the money but about feeling seen and valued. An update in my mind now gleefully whispered to me, I learned that competitions between friends can lead to both friction and an unexpected depth in connection. Looking back, that seemingly trivial debt acted like a guidepost, leading me to confront not just my financial responsibilities, but my emotional ones too. It became a lesson in empathy and respect, a reminder that true friendship treasures open-hearted conversations over mere transactions. And those rainy Thursdays? They aren't so dreary anymore, as they've become. Reminders of our renewed bond, strengthened through vulnerability, reminding me every day that sometimes, it's worth diving deeper to find the light. As I settled into my routine, the mundanity of each rainy Thursday transformed into a ritual of sorts. Each week, I would sit on my porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, as the rain drizzled on the roof above, creating a comforting soundtrack of muted rain patters and distant thunder rumbles. The street, with its slick, glistening pavement, took on a different hue. Each drop of water seemed to wash away not just the grime of the day but also the tension that had once hovered between James and me. I would think back to that moment when I looked him in the eyes and saw the hurt festering beneath the surface, beneath our laughter and easy banter, like an unresolved question lurking in the shadows. It was in this quiet space of reflection that I learned the importance of humility and accountability, both to myself and to those closest to me. I never forgot that debt, the $60 that, at one point, felt insurmountable, almost like a millstone around my neck. Yet that very symbol of conflict became a mirror, prompting a deeper inquiry into how I navigated my relationships. James and I began to spend more time together, engaging in long talks that seemed endless under the canopy of evening stars or the dim, warm glow of a dimmed living room. We would play board games, dive into old movies, and explore our small town's hidden gems, often with laughter trailing behind us like a kite on a gentle breeze. Those moments drew out a connection I hadn't known we'd lacked before. Conversations became more meaningful, filled with genuine inquiries into each other's lives, worries, and dreams. There was a palpable shift. The unspoken tension was replaced with a camaraderie built on shared experiences and vulnerability. No longer did I feel the burden of that $60. Instead, it served as the catalyst for deeper exchanges. One particularly rainy Thursday, as we sipped our drinks and watched the clouds roll in, I opened up. "You know, I used to think friendship was just about hanging out and having fun, James. But I realize now it's about the tough stuff too, like debts and misunderstandings. I really appreciate how we've navigated through all of that. It brought us closer." He nodded, looking pensive, and then he smiled softly. I have to admit, I felt awkward about it, too. It wasn't just the money, it was what it represented. I don't want to feel like I'm holding something over you when all I really want is your company. The honesty hung in the air, wrapping around us like the comforting embrace of the warm sweaters we wore. I chuckled at the absurdity of how a financial transaction had morphed into a vehicle for deeper understanding. James reached for his phone, and with a twinkle in his eye, he pulled up a meme that perfectly encapsulated our journey, and we erupted into laughter, once again transported to a place where our bond felt effortless. That evening, the rain intensified, pounding against windows like a drum, but instead of keeping us boxed in, it felt liberating, an orchestra accompanying our newfound harmony. As the weeks turned into months, I cherished those Thursdays, never missing a chance to reconnect and nurture our friendship. I even made a mental note to repay the $60, but truthfully, it mattered less and less with each passing conversation. The emphasis shifted from debt to conversation, from obligation to connection. In a way, our playful banter transformed into discussions that danced around deeper themes, life, love, aspirations, and I began to realize that money and obligations are mere facets of a much larger picture. One evening, James surprised me with an early birthday celebration, a small gathering with close friends. As we settled in with laughter and stories, I felt a sense of belonging wash over me, filling the gaps that I'd sometimes not even noticed existed. In that warm glow, I leaned over and whispered to James, "Hey, I owe you something." He looked at me quizzically, his eyebrow raised, and I continued, this deep sense of gratitude for helping me see what truly matters. He just chuckled and nudged me playfully, a silent acknowledgement of our journey together. Though the rainy Thursdays still came, they carried a different energy now. They were soaked in laughter, born of warmth, and threaded with the beautiful realization that sometimes a rough patch can lead to a tapestry of richer connections. And though I never explicitly paid him back that $60, what emerged was far more valuable, an understanding that true friendship transcends financial debts, weaving an everlasting bond that brightens even the darkest of days. Perhaps, in its own way, that really was a payment worth cherishing. In the weeks that followed, I found myself smiling each time I heard the gentle patter of rain against my window. What used to feel monotonous now evoked an aurora of warmth in my heart. Those rainy Thursdays transformed into a cherished routine. I could almost hear the rain whispering secrets of camaraderie while I shuffled into my living room, bundled in a cozy blanket, a steaming mug of tea cradled in my hands. My phone buzzed to life, and a familiar name lit up the screen, Lucas. We had developed our own rhythm, a dance of banter and understanding that flowed easily, aided by shared memories and laughter. "Hey, you ready for our rain date?" the text read. Smiling to myself, I replied with a quick always. As I threw on my favorite hoodie, ready to dive into yet another cozy chapter of our friendship. Lucas arrived shortly after, a playful grin plastered across his face. "I brought snacks," he announced, producing a crinkly bag of popcorn and some gummy bears as if they were the treasures of a long-lost expedition. Settled on my couch, we slipped into our ritual, Netflix binging through the dreariest of mean days, outlining an adventure. Dipping into the surreal and the comedic, tracing myriad twists across genres, just like our conversations. And as the rain continued its serenade outside, something curious happened. Each time we laughed, each time we shared a meaningful look or a story from our past, I often found myself reflecting on the emotional balance we'd struck, threading through memories that we hadn't quite explored before. "I was thinking about that one time you tried to teach me how to cook," Lucas teased, nudging my shoulder. "You nearly burnt the house down." We both erupted in laughter, the shared embarrassment that once lurked in the corners now an emblem of progress, of understanding we had built upon one another's vulnerabilities. "Hey, don't forget I saved our lives from those flaming pancakes," I countered, recalling the chaos with a smirk. He shot back an exaggerated gasp, mock horror in his eyes. "I wouldn't call them pancakes. They were more like edible hockey pucks," I laughed harder, each taunt adding another layer to the fabric of our friendship. But nestled amid all the joy was something heavier, lurking just beneath the surface, a quiet contemplation about the essence of our exchanges. I had been hesitant to confront the emotional complexities that lay intertwined with our shared experiences. It was Lucas who finally led me there, unknowingly yet gently. With the popcorn bowl long emptied and the final credits rolling on yet another movie, I found myself breaking the easy banter, wanting to lay bare a thought that had occupied my mind. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about that $60, I said, sifting through my memories. "It's strange, but I feel like it became this little anchor for me, a symbol of how we needed that moment back then." Lucas turned to me, and his gaze grew serious. "You really don't need to feel guilty about that. I mean, we've moved past it, haven't we?" His voice was gentle, yet firm, a guiding light through the murkier waters. But I appreciate that you're thinking of it differently now. The honesty in his tone ignited a flicker of warmth inside me. It showed me how fragile friendships can feel, how they can be caught up in miscommunications or assumptions. But it also reminded me of how imperative it is to find that empathy, to seek understanding instead of cementing a line between us. We lingered in that silence, where nothing needed to be filled with words as the calming sound of raindrops on the window enveloped us. But as if carrying the weight of that moment, I reached for him, causing a spontaneous whirlwind of revelations to unspool between us. Thank you for being patient with me through all that. What are friends for? He shrugged, smiling softly, yet the sincerity rippled through his eyes, anchoring me in the moment. That revealed something profound within me. The comfort of connection we had both nurtured through our shared antics and deep conversations was everything I had truly needed, more than any monetary value ever could hold. I realized that it wasn't about erasing the debt, nor tying it neatly with a bow, but about celebrating the transformation it had invoked in us. And as we settled into a more comfortable silence, I felt a lightness wash over me, the previously heavy air of expectations gently dispersing into something far richer. Fast forward again to another rainy Thursday. It was becoming my favorite sanctuary each week. This time, I felt the soft tickle of excitement ripple through my veins as Lucas arrived with a new bottle of board games and tales ready to unfurl. We played, we teased, and we occasionally drifted into deeper conversations, additional layers of our lives revealed moment by moment. In the end, I didn't need to pay him back. Instead, the debt faded, replaced instead by a tapestry of trust woven through shared experiences, a deeper connection that shimmered more brightly than any money exchanged could manage. And through the seemingly mundane, fragile threads of rainy Thursdays, we built a bond that could weather any storm, eager and ready for whatever lay ahead. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat alone at my desk, the soft click of my computer keys breaking the stillness of the late afternoon. There was a flicker of a notification on my screen, a question that had been posted to AskReddit, asking what topic one would choose to give a 1-hour informative speech about for $10,000 if they had no choice but to do so right then and there. The absurdity of it sparked a flicker of excitement. What if I really had to speak in front of a crowd? I found myself imagining various topics flickering through my mind. As a teacher, I had the privilege of learning alongside my students, unraveling the mysteries of the world through our discussions. My stature as a seasoned educator shifted somewhere deep within me as I fought the creeping anxiety at the thought of standing before a crowd, my heart racing at the idea of being thrust into the spotlight. After a brief moment of considering the daunting task, I settled on something that had always lingered in the background of my passions: the significance of storytelling through community history. It was a topic close to my heart, woven into the threads of my own life. I began to visualize the faces of the community members I knew, rich in stories yet unchronicled, the small-town narratives that rarely found a place in textbooks, the tales of resilience, heartbreak, and triumph shared over coffee and pie at the local diner. But as I settled into my daydream of an eager crowd nodding respectfully at my passionate presentation, a sudden shift occurred. The hum in the room became punctuated by an abrupt voice. "You have to give a speech right now." The words echoed in my mind for a moment, and I looked up, convinced I was imagining things. But the stern figure in front of me was real, a classmate from college, Mike, who had always been an extroverted whirlwind, charismatic in a way I envied. "You said you could talk about anything. This is your chance to show what you've got. $10,000. He persisted, eyes wide with an infectious enthusiasm that I couldn't quite resist. The mixture of disbelief, amusement, and an adrenaline surge washed over me. In an instant, I found my mind racing with the knowledge I wanted to impart. As I stood, I felt a familiar heaviness settle in my chest, the nagging fear of public speaking, the memories of stumbling over my words in past endeavors washed over me like waves. Yet, I breathed in deeply, and the anticipation of the unexpected opportunity compelled me forward, my feet moving before my mind could intervene. Mike led me toward an impromptu gathering of colleagues in the next conference room. My heart thudded against my ribs, a metronome marking each passing second as I gathered my thoughts amidst the friendly jabs and encouraging nods from familiar faces. Once I reached the front of the makeshift room, I paused, glancing across the assortment of eager eyes. I noticed a few raised eyebrows and smirks. But there was also a palpable curiosity. I took a deep breath, my voice hiccuping at first as I began to speak about community storytelling, the importance of listening, archiving, and sharing our histories. Each word that slipped from my lips grew more confident as I dove deeper into how weaving together the fabric of a community helps nurture connections. With each anecdote shared, I saw nods of understanding and glimpses of recognition. It became more than just a speech, it was a dialogue that blossomed into a shared experience, reminding me of those conversations that punctuated our everyday lives. As I reached the crescendo of my narrative, I felt as if the pieces of me that often laid dormant found their rhythm, summoning melancholic memories while dancing joyously with hope. When I finally concluded, the room erupted in applause, a flood of appreciation that momentarily washed away my insecurities. I laughed lightly, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. As Mike approached with a cheeky grin and a mock bow, the ripples of unexpected camaraderie pushed against the boundaries of my initial awkwardness, redefining my perception of myself and the impact I could create. As time passed, the impromptu speech became a topic of light-hearted conversation, an unexpected spark igniting new projects centered on oral histories within our community. I decided to dedicate my weekends to recording interviews with locals, documenting their stories for a collaborative project blending art and history. Reflecting on this experience taught me that sometimes, the greatest opportunities emerge from the most frightening moments, nudging us to grow right through our fears. A final thought lingered in my mind: we all have stories worth telling, ones that shape who we are. A week later, I posted an update on the thread. It had turned out the impromptu speech was merely the beginning of a beautiful venture, and as I felt the warmth of community around me, I knew I had found a piece of myself I had previously overlooked, a reminder that sometimes, the most important stories are our own. A week later, I had posted an update on the thread, sharing how that impromptu speech had turned into so much more than just a fleeting moment of terror. It dawned on me as I sat in my living room, the faint hum of the city outside a comforting backdrop, how that day had been a pebble tossed into the still waters of my life, creating ripples I hadn't anticipated. Initially, when the adrenaline had faded and the laughter of my colleagues had turned into a playful joke, I felt lightheaded, a bit disoriented about what I had opened up to. But with each passing day, the realization of the audience's genuine interest in my experiences began to take root in my mind, pushing me to explore deeper expressions of myself, into the realms of vulnerability I had long buried under layers of caution and self-doubt. So, I started a blog, gradually crafting narratives around the various facets of my life, the heartbreak of my college years, the joy of falling in love, and the quiet pangs of loneliness that sometimes sneaked in even in a crowded room. Those stories transformed, reflecting my sorrow, my laughter, and my fears in a way that felt both cleansing and electrifying, almost as if I were giving them voice for the first time. I shared it with friends, unsure about their reaction, expecting just polite nods and smiles, but instead, I received heartfelt messages of gratitude and appreciation, each one a reminder that we all navigated the same phases of life, sometimes feeling utterly alone. Encouraged, I reached out to an audience wider than my circle of acquaintances. I began to hear echoes of my thoughts and feelings reverberate through the comments and emails that flooded in. Readers shared their own tales, stories tinged with sorrow and redemption, thanking me for speaking out, as if in that open space I had created, they found a platform to unveil their truths. A month later, I hosted an online event titled Tell Your Story, inviting everyone from strangers to friends to step into the virtual spotlight and share. That night, I felt a glaze of contentment wash over me as I listened to voices from all walks of life, each one weaving pieces of their hearts into the fabric of our shared experience. It was a cacophony of human emotion and connection, resembling a melodic symphony wherein each note represented pain, growth, love, and resilience. I had no idea the event would gather hundreds, or that it would light a spark in my heart, a yearning to explore storytelling as both a medium and a means of healing for myself and others. As the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm glow through my window, I reflected on how a simple, terrifying moment of being thrown into the spotlight had acted as a catalyst for growth. Crafting my stories felt like stitching together broken pieces of a beautiful quilt, where each patch represented a fragment of experience, an echo of who I was and who I aimed to become. I paraphrased that sentiment in my follow-up post, sharing how the connections I had cultivated opened my eyes to the weight of our stories and how vital they are within this vast universe of forgotten voices. As the comments rolled in, filled with encouragement and resonance, I smiled at my screen, feeling the kinship that came from revealing our raw parts. Reflecting back, I realized how the task of giving an hour-long speech had propelled me forward into a journey rich with discovery, pervaded by the understanding that when we each tell our stories, however trivial they may seem, we breathe life into others, creating a vibrant tapestry of shared human experience. And as I let that thought settle comfortably in my mind, I whispered a quiet promise to myself: I would continue to share, continue to connect, and allow this newfound sense of purpose to blossom into something greater than I could ever fathom at that moment. So, I made it. My mission to seek out opportunities to share my experiences, no matter how mundane they might seem on the surface. The following weekend, I found myself at a local community center, where a group of individuals from all walks of life gathered to share their truths. The atmosphere hummed with anticipation, a vibrant tapestry of voices ready to be woven together. I watched as each person stood up, some trembling with nerves, others bursting with energy, and with every story told, I felt a flicker of connection. My own turn approached, and, recalling the buzz of the audience from my first speech, I took a deep breath, recalling the way they leaned in, engaged and willing to absorb what I had to say. When I spoke, it was about vulnerability, the invisible weight it carries, the power in opening up. I shared a poignant memory from my childhood, a time when I had felt out of place and alone at school until, one day, a kindred spirit had approached me. As I recounted how that single act of friendship had turned my world upside down in the best way possible, the room filled with murmurs of recognition and connection. It was then I understood that we all grapple with our own insecurities, grappling silently until someone dares to cut through the noise and reach out. The joy of sharing and the profound weight of connection lingered long after I stepped down from that makeshift stage, and in that moment, I realized that this was the nourishment I had hungered for: validation, compassion, and understanding. Days turned into weeks, and I became a regular at the community center, leading workshops and discussions on storytelling and the power it holds, finding joy in helping others craft their narratives. The feedback was overwhelming, stories flowed like water, and each shared experience seemed to shine a light on hidden corners of our lives we might otherwise carry alone. One evening, we hosted a storytelling night that had drawn in a larger crowd than I had anticipated, a mix of familiar faces and strangers eager to share. I sat back in the corner, a warm glow settling over me, serving as a gentle reminder of how far I had come. The air buzzed with laughter, tears, and gasps, and I listened intently, feeling almost like a proud guardian of this burgeoning community. After the event, I noticed a woman who had been sitting quietly at the back, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. When I approached her, she simply embraced me, and in that moment, I felt the undeniable power of connection, that a few shared words could transcend individual stories and shape something much bigger. A few months later, I received an unexpected message. Someone had suggested I compile the stories I had encountered into a book, separate and distinct narratives that collectively illustrated the breadth of human experience. It felt like an invitation to explore a greater purpose, a chance to preserve the moments that had touched me so deeply. It was daunting, but I took a leap of faith, pouring each tale into my own reflections until they mingled together in a rhythm that felt just right. With every chapter, I penned not just the stories but the threads that pulled our lives together, dissimilar yet intertwined. Finally, the day came when I held the first printed copy in my hands, my heart swelled with pride and vulnerability alike. As I stood at the community center table, selling the book, I was met with enemy fear and familiar joy. To my surprise, familiar faces flooded in, sharing their thoughts about how storytelling had impacted their lives and how my journey had inspired them. I felt a sense of fulfillment wash over me, a quiet recognition tinged with joy. It was no longer just about me. This had grown into an extension of us all, breathing life into the stories that shaped the fabric of our existence. People left with copies in hand and a spark in their eyes, and among them was the woman from that first storytelling night. She approached, her voice soft but resolute. "Thank you for creating this space. Thank you for gathering us." Little did she know how infinitely grateful I felt for that simple moment of acknowledgement. As the months passed and I continued sharing my book, the threads of community solidified, weaving us closer together, transforming strangers into allies, kindred spirits in shared struggles. It became clear how the act of telling stories was nothing less than an invitation to be seen. It was an avenue for us to collectively heal. My initial fears had melted away, giving me the courage to step into vulnerability, and from that, a radiant community emerged, fostering warmth and compassion. It was as if my story had been but a pebble, cast into still water, sending ripples far beyond anything I could have anticipated. There was no final chapter, only an open-ended tale of connection and resilience that carried on, echoing the sentiment I had first encountered, a reminder that we all have stories worth sharing. And as I closed my eyes at night, I let the whispers of those stories settle into my heart, a song of humanity reminding me we were all in this together, forever intertwined in the powerful, beautiful tapestry that is life. The question fluttered through my mind like a moth drawn to the dim light of my living room. It was simple, but the implications loomed heavy on my heart. Am I the asshole for charging my adult children rent? I never imagined this is where I would find myself at 55, standing at the crossroads of nurturing love and harsh reality. My children, Claire and Josh, had both moved back in after college, faced with a tight job market and student loans that loomed like clouds ready to burst. It felt like just yesterday I was sending them off into the world, filled with ambition and dreams, and now the stack of bills, once a distant whisper, was suddenly a roiling shout that demanded to be heard. I loved my children fiercely, but the reality of our situation was different now. My modest home, decorated with family photos that were practically engraved in my heart, was quickly becoming a shared refuge rather than a home. Things shifted, however, when the conversation turned to finances one evening while we surveyed my faded kitchen, once filled with laughter and now littered with remnants of takeout dinners. I broached the subject lightly, almost gingerly, trying to extricate myself from the churning feeling of guilt that wound tightly in my gut. You know, it's not that we can't help each other, I started, but maybe we should think about small contributions for living here. Claire, always the more outspoken of the two, rolled her eyes, casting a glance at Josh, who sat with his head buried in his phone, blissfully unaware. Seriously, Mom? Rent? We're trying to find our footing. She replied, exasperation cutting through her voice like a knife. I felt my heart sink as Josh chimed in, softening the blow with, "We're still your kids, you know." Initially, I shrugged off their anger, convincing myself it stemmed from the stress of their own financial burdens, yet the guilt lingered like a shadow. The thought that I might be seen as cold or unloving gnawed at me. My thoughts spiraled, had I failed them by expecting them to contribute to the household? But then, another voice in my head reminded me of the sacrifices I had made. I had worked extra shifts to give them what they needed, and it dawned on me that this was about preparing them for the realities of adulthood, not about making me less of a mother. Still, I wrestled nightly with the decision, my journal filled with poignant reflections on whether love and responsibility could coexist without one overshadowing the other. It was during a heated argument a few days later that it all boiled over, my attempts at calm being met with more resentment. "You say you're teaching us, but this feels more like punishment," Claire shouted, tears in her eyes. I held my breath, the weight of her distress settling heavily on my shoulders. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just about money, it was about trust and recognition. "I'm not punishing you. I want you both to thrive. I want you to prepare for the world outside these walls," I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. The room became engulfed in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. It was clear I needed to reconsider the way forward. After much soul-searching, I decided to propose a compromise that would allow us to keep our familial bond intact. The very next day, I gathered my children and talked through my thoughts, removing the label of rent and instead framing it as a living contribution, focusing on what they could help with, whether it was chores or a small monthly amount that would go toward shared costs. To my surprise, they listened, the tension in the room gradually ebbing as we discussed our expectations with open hearts. "So it's not about just money, right? It's teamwork?" Josh asked, his eyes lighting up with understanding. I nodded fervently, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. We moved forward with boundaries but also with a renewed sense of cooperation, and I marveled at the transformation that occurred, realizing we were not simply roommates navigating rent but rather a family redefining our dynamics together. As the weeks turned into months, I discovered that this change not only eased my financial burden but also rekindled a sense of shared purpose among us. Conversations returned to the table, laughter emanated from our shared moments, and in those evenings spent together, it felt as if we were finding our way back, stitching back together what was nearly frayed. The idea of charging them rent became not a source of resentment but a catalyst for deeper connection. In hindsight, I didn't just charge them, I opened the door to joint stewardship of our lives, an adjustment that allowed us to step forward together rather than apart. As for updates, it's been almost a year since the paradigm shift, and I'm heartened to say Claire now has an internship that could lead to a full-time job, while Josh is earning his keep through freelance gigs. They still contribute to household expenses, each month passing me their share with pride, as if each note exchanged is more than just money, but a message that reads, "We've got this, together." And as I sit in the same faded kitchen, watching them grow into the people I always hoped they would be, I realize this journey has taught me as much as it has taught them. Am I the asshole? Perhaps once, but I've come to understand that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the strongest connections. As I sit in that faded kitchen, sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains, casting soft shadows on the table where we gather for our makeshift family meetings, I reflect on how our home has transformed over the past few months. When Josh and Emily moved in, there was a palpable tension in the air, a mix of expectation and uncertainty. I had been battling my own insecurities and regrets about charging them rent, fearing it would disrupt our bond. Yet, every time I see them, filled with determination. As they balance schoolwork with part-time jobs, I feel an overwhelming sense of pride. Each evening, as we share our meals, the laughter echoes in the corners of the room, wrapping around us like a warm blanket, dispelling any lingering doubt I had initially held about my decision. It had been Josh who first approached me with concern about finances after losing his last full-time job. He spoke earnestly about wanting to contribute more rather than feel like a burden. "I don't want you to struggle because of me," he had said, that familiar spark of responsibility igniting in his eyes. How could I argue with that? Emily followed suit, her spirit equally fired up, insisting that she too wanted to pitch in, to contribute to the household in a way that felt meaningful. It was then that I realized this was about more than just money, it was about empowerment. With the rent agreement in place, I made it abundantly clear that their contributions would be saved toward a future goal, perhaps toward their educational aspirations or an eventual escape of their own, helping to ensure they wouldn't find themselves completely reliant on me once they stepped into the wider world. Each time I handed them a receipt showing their contributions, I would joke, "Look at you, you're practically business owners now." Following those jokes were serious discussions about budgeting and saving. They would listen intently, their eyes bright, eager to absorb the advice, while I shared tales from my own youth, trying to weave in lessons learned as I stumbled through life. Those evenings began to intertwine with deeper conversations about dreams, fears, and the kind of people they envisioned themselves becoming. With every discussion, I could feel our relationship evolving, both as a parent and as individuals seeking to understand one another. One rainy afternoon, however, things took a challenging turn. Emily returned home distraught, her usual spark dulled. "Mom, I don't know if I can continue doing this. It feels like everything is piling on top of me," she admitted, falling onto the couch, her voice strained and defeated. I joined her on the couch, pulling the fuzzy blanket over us as we settled into the silence that accompanied her heavy words. The weight of missed assignments and looming deadlines pressed on her like an ocean wave, and I could see the hope in her eyes flicker momentarily. "What if we adjust a bit? Rent doesn't always have to be paid in full," I offered gently. "Your well-being comes first. It's okay to ask for help." My words seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, silence enveloped us before she finally nodded, a small smile breaking through the storm clouds. As the weeks rolled by, we found new rhythms, discussing every tweak and adjustment we made to our agreements candidly. Josh, too, began to share his own struggles more openly, confessing moments of loneliness and his fear of never reaching the ambitions he carried. It was during one of these powerful exchanges that I understood the true essence of decisions made from love. Not only did they learn responsibility, but they also discovered vulnerability and space for genuine dialogue, something I had always longed for us to possess. We emerged stronger as a family, moved forward by empathy and mutual respect, acknowledging our individual journeys without losing sight of our shared path. In this warm cocoon of familiarity and love, I've realized that our home isn't just a physical space, it's a sanctuary carved from our shared experiences, successes, and collective heartaches. The question of whether I was the asshole lingers somewhere in the back of my mind, but it has transformed from a painful inquiry into an echo of a lesson learned. By fostering their independence within the walls of our home, I not only nurtured their growth but also kept the ties of our relationship tightly woven, reminding us all that love doesn't fade in the face of responsibility. Instead, it evolves, deepening in ways I could never have imagined. As I sit here, I can see that it isn't about the money or even the chores, it's about understanding, growth, and creating an environment where we can all be better versions of ourselves together. And while the future is uncertain, a chorus of questions still unanswered, I feel a profound sense of gratitude for this shared journey, knowing that being a parent is less about getting it right all the time and more about navigating every twist and turn with an open heart. Sometimes, I find solace in the thought of letting each of them fly with their own set of wings, ready to embrace whatever the world has in store, while I would remain here, cheering them on from the sidelines, proud of the choices we made together in this home of ours. However, as the weeks passed, I began to experience an unfamiliar unease, a gentle pressure building beneath the surface of our harmonious existence. It started with those quiet moments, sitting alone in my favorite worn-out chair while Josh and Lena collaborated at the kitchen table, their laughter and chatter creating a cozy atmosphere that made my heart swell with pride. Yet, tucked away in the corner of my mind was a prickling doubt, whispering that perhaps I had placed an unnecessary burden on their shoulders. The thoughts started to gnaw at me during sleepless nights, where thoughts raced through my mind like leaves caught in a gust of wind, questioning my decisions and choices. They did, after all, come to me during the pandemic when everything had been uncertain, their lives upended in ways I couldn't fully grasp. I remember my own parents, who had faced such trials with grit and resilience, but never once did they charge me rent. As days turned into weeks, the tight-knit bond we shared sometimes felt like it stood on shaky ground. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the joy of our routines, breakfast-making competitions, game nights peppered with sarcasm and laughter. And those afternoons when I would find them lost in their respective worlds, creativity bursting from them like blooming wildflowers. But the shadows of my thoughts lingered, lingering as a subtle reminder that their growing independence came with its own set of fears. One night, after an especially hectic day, I was cleaning up the remnants of dinner, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of clarity. I turned to them and, in a voice that quivered with a mix of uncertainty and resolve, asked if they felt the same way I did. To my surprise, their expressions turned serious, and I felt as if I had ventured into unknown territory. Josh, with his thoughtful gaze, spoke first. "Mom, we appreciate everything you've done for us. We're here because you let us be ourselves, and if charging rent is part of that, then we accept it as a part of our growth." Lena, always the more intuitive one, added, "It's funny you mention this because I was worried it was our responsibility to take care of you, not the other way around." Their words, laden with sincerity, left me both relieved and bewildered. Here I was, thinking I was the one responsible for their future, yet together, we had created something profound, a partnership built on mutual respect and support. The subsequent weeks held a newfound sense of openness, the pressure lifted, replaced by unexpected lightness. We spoke often, delving into deeper conversations about financial stability, career aspirations, and dreams yet to be realized. Each discussion became a building block, forming a bridge between my worries and their understanding of adulthood, and suddenly, Josh and Lena were no longer just my children, but partners in a shared journey of life. As we moved further into this phase of our lives, I began to find joy in the small victories, the little projects that each of them undertook that ventured into adulthood's daunting reality, with me as a spectator cheering them on in the background. One evening, each of them sat next to me, Josh back from a successful project pitch, Lena having submitted her first freelance article, the air thick with accomplishment. I placed my hand on theirs, a silent acknowledgement of our collective achievements, a bond that transcended the need for rent or adulting responsibilities. They were soaring, and I realized I was simply here to help them acclimate to the winds beneath their wings. And so our story evolved, settling into a rhythm that felt genuine and nurturing. It was about more than money or bills, it was about lessons learned under our roof, and I cherished the thought that perhaps I hadn't been the asshole after all. It was merely the ebb and flow of family dynamics shifting. With nights spent under the gentle glow of lamplight discussing prospects and dreams, I understood that being together, sharing our fears and aspirations, had emboldened us, allowing for a new understanding about what it means to navigate adulthood together. As we moved further into this unknown future, I embraced it. The unknown no longer felt like a weight but a canvas awaiting our colors. Perhaps being a parent is knowing when to let the reins go, and I felt ready for whatever paths lay ahead. The uncertainty didn't haunt me anymore, it ignited a sense of adventure. So, maybe in this journey, I was never an asshole, but rather just a guide, and we were collectively painting a beautiful masterpiece of our shared lives. There I was, standing in the corner of a dimly lit room, watching as people laughed and mingled, the soft thrum of music setting a carefree backdrop to the evening. It was supposed to be a fun night out, a chance for me to impress Melissa, my date, who had caught my eye a few weeks ago at the coffee shop where I worked. We had hit it off swiftly, sharing jokes and secrets over cups of steaming lattes, and on that Friday night, I felt hopeful that this party would deepen our connection. But a mere hour into the gathering, my excitement began to dwindle as a strange pit of disappointment settled in my stomach. I had made my way to the bar to grab water, feeling slightly parched from the small talk I had been engaging in. I turned to Melissa and asked if she would mind grabbing 2 glasses while I full-on chatted with a few friends who had arrived. With a playful smile, she agreed. Minutes passed, and I noticed her standing at the bar, chatting with some of her friends and completely neglecting my request. I could feel a sense of annoyance creeping up me. It wasn't that big of a favor. I mean, how hard was it to just fill a glass with water? When I finally got her attention, I decided to approach the bar myself, making my way through the warm crowd. I didn't want to make a scene, but as I reached the counter, claims of thirst whispered in my mind. When I returned with my 2 glasses, I found her laughing with a group, her head thrown back in mirth, showing no signs of having noticed my absence. I felt a mix of irritation and frustration clashing within me. Shouldn't she have cared that I was waiting? After all, if the roles were reversed, wouldn't I have done the same for her? I set the glasses down, approached her too calm demeanor, and quipped lightly, "Did you not hear me ask for water?" Her response was more flippant than I had anticipated, akin to waving a dismissive hand at a child's tantrum. "Chill out. It's just water. We're having fun, aren't we?" I had considered myself easygoing, perhaps even too easy at times, but this felt different. I wasn't just parched, I felt like an afterthought. I thought about trying to shrug it off, to laugh with her, and pretend her nonchalance didn't bother me. Yet that wasn't the case. Something deep inside tugged at me, urging me to pay attention to the growing fissure in our evening. "You wouldn't want to take water to someone else, would you?" Her chuckle faded. Clearly, I had struck a nerve, but instead of a calm discussion, I was met with her raised eyebrows and a tone that meant an impending storm. I felt my stomach churn as a deeper realization set in for me. This wasn't just about water, it felt like our dynamic was revealing an underlying issue. These clues stripped the evening of all its sweetness. I stepped away from the group, indicating I needed a breather. I felt guilt wash over me. I liked her. Was I really about to let a glass of water become the reason I'd leave? After taking a moment in the rear garden, surrounded by the muted sounds of the party drifting through the open door, something shifted. I didn't want to keep fighting for her attention. It stung, but leaving felt like reclaiming a small piece of my dignity. As I walked out, I glanced back at Melissa, immersed in her laughter, oblivious, and I realized that sometimes, situations highlight the disparities in how people value one another. I felt a bittersweet relief washing over me. Deep down, I knew this wasn't a friendship destined to grow. Later that night, as I lay sprawled in my room under softly glowing fairy lights, I reflected on what happened. Maybe I wasn't the biggest villain, perhaps, it was time to revamp what I sought in relationships. Maybe my needs were simple but important, and if she couldn't meet them, or even acknowledge them, that was worth noting. That little moment revealed more about her indifference, and ultimately, I would rather spend my time with someone who wouldn't just quench my physical thirst, but my emotional one as well. Update: a few days passed, and Melissa texted me, casually asking when we could hang out again. I considered the message, my mind aligning all the reasons to say no. Instead, I replied honestly. I mentioned that I appreciated the good times but felt like we were on different wavelengths, and perhaps it was best to part ways. To my surprise, she responded quickly, expressing mild frustration but also acceptance. "I guess we just weren't meant to be," she replied, a little too nonchalantly. I sat there staring at my phone. Yes, it was bittersweet, but it also felt liberating, like I was finally setting my own boundaries, opening up space for someone who might just care enough to hand me a glass of water when I asked for it. I set my phone down, staring blankly at the room around me, filled with the soft hues of early evening light filtering through the sheer curtains. The silence seemed thicker now, as if the air had gained weight after our exchange. I found myself reflecting not only on that last date but on that entire week, the parties I had attended, the conversations that felt more like choreographed performances than genuine connections. My heart had pangs of loneliness even amidst laughter and chatter. It was all so superficial. I cherished depth, but depth seemed harder to find. I thought about that moment at the party when all I had wanted was a simple glass of water. It felt monumental then, a test of sorts. Would he care enough to step away from his own fun for just a minute to make sure I was comfortable? But instead, I had been met with uncomfortable laughter and a flippant brush-off, the kind of casual dismissal that stung far more deeply than anyone could have anticipated. As I wandered into the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass of the cupboard door and winced. My eyes looked tired, a little sad. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for anyway. Some validation? Understanding? Or perhaps just a partner who saw me as I truly was, rather than a checklist they could tick off at a party. Sipping the warm tea, I tried to focus my thoughts. I could feel the echoes of their laughter still surrounding me, but rather than drown in it, I wanted to find a way out into the quiet. I wanted to rediscover myself in the silence. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed busy, working through stacks of paperwork during the day, and on weekends, I buried myself in hobbies I had neglected. A long-forgotten passion for painting took precedence one afternoon as I dipped my brush into vibrant colors. Each stroke on the canvas seemed to soothe my restlessness, allowing buried emotions to flow out, a startling catharsis emerging from the swirl of blues and greens. Yet amid that serenity, I couldn't shake off the tangled cords of loneliness. Somewhere deep down, I still craved companionship, a connection that felt real. By the time I got the invite for a friend's upcoming birthday party, I hesitated, contemplating whether I should go. This time, however, the thought didn't fill me with dread. In fact, it carried a sense of anticipation. I dressed up that evening with a newfound liveliness. I chose an outfit that made me feel confident, a pair of bright, flowy pants and a top that shimmered just enough to catch the light. Maybe, with a little luck, I would meet someone who understood the value of communication, even for small things like water. It would be clear from the start that I wanted more, a dual respect that could blossom in little interactions. Once at the party, I first wandered toward the snack table, grabbing a few bites while scanning the crowd. I laughed as I recognized familiar faces and exchanged pleasantries. For the first time in a while, I felt weightless in my own skin, unburdened by expectations, both from myself and the people around me. Eventually, I found a quiet corner on the patio, where soft music fueled gentle conversations. I admired the way the stars began to twinkle above. It was mesmerizing, grounding, and perhaps inviting for possibilities. That's when she approached, Maya, an acquaintance from a mutual circle. She had a genuine smile that lit up her face, and her laughter resonated with warmth and candor. I was surprised at how easy it was to talk to her, as if we were old friends catching up. Mid-conversation, I asked her if I could grab a glass of water and, to my delight, she immediately grabbed mine and her cup matter-of-factly, sliding them both toward me without second-guessing. As she casually remarked how important hydration could be, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time since that last encounter, I felt seen, as if I had been handed a lifeline rather than just a drink. Over the next hour, we shared stories about life, quirky hobbies, travel dreams, and the absurdity of dating mishaps. I felt my heart lightening as I realized the conversation flowed effortlessly. There was no pretense, just two people connecting over shared experiences and laughter. It didn't matter if this led anywhere romantic, it was the dialogue and the companionship that felt renewing. Amidst all this, I could feel my earlier hesitations fading away, not because I feared being alone, but because here, in this little pocket of the universe, I knew I had worth, and I wouldn't settle for anything less. As the night wound down, we exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch, both of us leaving perhaps with the potential for friendship or something deeper. Walking home under the starlit sky, I took a deep breath, a smile drawing across my lips. I didn't feel like I had lost it all, rather, I felt that I was finally starting to gain everything I wanted, not just in a partner, but also the self-assurance of knowing what I deserved. In the days that followed, I wondered if any of this would lead anywhere more than light-hearted chats over coffee. Still, the journey of rediscovering myself felt infinitely more significant than focusing on finding a romantic partner. As those weeks turned into months, each conversation with Maya, no matter how simple, helped build a foundation that eventually turned delightful, sometimes surprising. I realized it was always the little things that mattered, just like a glass of water did that night. I chuckled softly to myself, reflecting that maybe, finally, I had learned to navigate my own path, and perhaps I had even found someone who could walk alongside it, glass in hand, genuinely invested in more than just where life would lead us. And so, as I curled up on my couch one quiet evening, I felt a peace I hadn't encountered in a long time, and as I drifted off to sleep, I knew, I wasn't the asshole for leaving a party. If anything, I had made room for something far better than I had ever hoped for. The following weeks unfolded like a gentle sunrise, warm and promising. I took my time getting used to this new chapter. I was buoyed by my decision, and it sparked something within me, a renewed sense of self-worth that felt as refreshing as my long-awaited glass of water. I began to explore hobbies I had set aside for far too long, painting during the quiet afternoons, journaling under the naked branches of winter trees, and even experimenting with new recipes after a cold spell had made takeout an almost too recurrent theme. With each brushstroke or new ingredient, I felt greater clarity wash over me, like I was reclaiming pieces of myself that I didn't know were lost in the routine of trying to please others. Yet, while wallowing in my solitude, I found myself thinking about the deeper connections I craved. Sometimes, I'd scroll through my phone, catching snippets of conversations from my friends, discussing their heartbreaks or busy careers, which only reminded me that even in shared experiences, people saw the world so differently. It wasn't just about parties or social gatherings anymore, it was about feeling valued in the smallest acts, of someone genuinely listening to my needs. One crisp Saturday afternoon, I received a text from a friend I hadn't heard from in a long while. Jess always had the right level of kindness blended with mischief that made her captivating to be around. She wanted to know if I'd join her and a few others at a local coffee shop for an art festival starting next weekend. Memories of our spontaneous adventures flickered in my mind, and without hesitating this time, I agreed. The closer the date approached, the more I found myself alternating between excitement and apprehension. What if I froze again? What if someone needed something from me, and I felt constricted by the desire to appease? Those thoughts clung to me like shadows, but I understood they stemmed from the residual anxiety of that last party. And yet, how could I forge new memories without risking a little vulnerability? The day arrived, and the old coffee shop was even more enchanting than I remembered, with chunky vintage furniture and soft jazz humming in the background. The walls were adorned with local artists' works, vibrant colors splashed across canvases, each whispering a story I longed to dive into. Spotting Jess was easy, her laughter cut through the bustling chatter like sunlight piercing through the trees. We greeted each other with enthusiastic hugs and lingering eye contact that reassured me we were still on the same wavelength. As our group settled in, sipping on our drinks and discussing everything from art to dreams, I found solace in belonging. There was a comfort in the laughter, and despite my earlier reservations, I discovered how liberating it felt just to be seen and heard. Halfway through our gathering, I excused myself for a moment and made my way to the restroom. Glancing in the mirror, I smoothed down my hair and took a deep breath. I realized that I had spent too long doubting my worth, afraid of facing discomfort and potential heartbreak. As I returned to the table, I couldn't help but smile. I was welcomed back to the group with open arms, a seat saved beside Jess. The conversation flowed, laughter crescendoed, and someone even asked about my recent painting venture, prompting a glimmer of pride within me to share my latest piece. That evening turned into an impromptu art critique followed by plans to visit galleries around town. It felt like a tapestry of warmth was woven around us all, threading kindness, creativity, and understanding together. I left the venue feeling lighter, the tension that had momentarily wrapped around my chest uncoiling like the tendrils of dawn breaking through. As I drove home, the streetlights flickering past, I reflected on the day, a mosaic of rekindled friendships, laughter shared over cappuccinos, and the beauty of allowing myself to step outside of what once felt like looming shadows. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be genuinely present with others and myself. I realized I didn't have to mold myself into someone's ideal collection of traits to find companionship, I simply needed to allow myself to exist as I was. Looking at the horizon ahead of me, painted in nothing but the gentle hues of twilight, I whispered to myself, I'm not the asshole for leaving that party, but rather, I am the architect of my own journey, and finally, I could feel that faint hope blossoming with every step I took. I never thought I would find myself in a position where I'd owe money to the mafia, but here I am, staring at the wall of my dimly lit apartment, feeling the weight of my decisions clawing at my throat. My life was simple enough before this mess, filled with late nights at the coffee shop where I worked, a smattering of friends who never quite grasped the depths of my anxiety, and a degree in art I never used. It all started with that rogue decision to lend some cash to my cousin, Alex, who promised he'd pay me back but instead fell further into a spiral of debts he couldn't manage. I was naive, thinking that I could trust him and would be shielded from the troubles that followed. Just a few weeks later, a couple of intimidating figures showed up at my door, their tattoos swirling with ominous tales, their expressions stern. I remember how my heart raced as I tried to follow their conversation. It was a blurring mix of threats and cold promises, all hinting that my cousin had taken a loan from them, one with terms I never wanted to know. They demanded my help to settle his debts, a fair share, they claimed, but it was more than I could ever afford, leaving me with an insurmountable weight. My anxiety turned into sheer panic as the reality of my situation sank in. Every night afterward was filled with sleepless worry as I stared at the ceiling, visions of their faces creeping into my thoughts, fueling my fears that I might be their next target if I couldn't scrape together the cash. I tried talking to Alex, but he simply shrugged off his responsibility, deep in denial as he licked his wounds and wallowed in his futile dreams of success. Friends, whenever I attempted to confide in them, would bless me with that infuriatingly sympathetic look, thinking that my plight was simply a relatable tale from the rat race of adulthood, but in reality, I was grappling with monster-like figures lurking in the corners of my reality. I spent countless nights pacing, gathering excuses for when they would come knocking again, unable to shake the feeling that I was being suffocated by the tightrope I've had to walk ever since that awful day. Days turned into weeks, and my stress began manifesting physically, headaches that wouldn't relent, that churning stomach, the way my hands trembled whenever I heard a knock at the door, and how every unfamiliar face in the grocery store made me flinch with panic. But then, there came a strange moment of clarity. I realized I couldn't live my life in fear any longer. The chaos had spiraled into a prison of my own making. That night, I took a deep breath and flipped my phone open, scrolling through my contacts until I reached one person I hadn't spoken to in months, my childhood friend Jamie. Jamie had dipped her toes into the world of freelance journalism, and while I had always admired her tenacity, I was a little ashamed for not keeping in touch. We talked for hours, and after I poured my heart out about Alex and the Mafia, she listened without judgment, her voice soothing and steady. Somehow, amidst all the panic, I found strength in just sharing my burden, and Jamie agreed to help in any way she could. Together, we crafted a plan, not to pay the debts I owed, but to confront the situation with clarity. She called in favors from her contacts, learning more about the Mafia's operations in our city and finding potential loopholes I could exploit to shield myself from any violent repercussions. It wasn't a foolproof plan, and it required a lot of deep breaths and late-night strategizing, but I finally felt like I was regaining control. I never did find the money to pay off those debts, nor did I plan to. Instead, I cut off any ties with Alex and contacted local authorities to report the escalating threats I had been receiving. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and I discovered strength in the vulnerability of asking for help. As I sit on my couch now, huddled in my blanket, I think about how the confrontation turned into a bittersweet closure for me, and although I'm still buried in the remnants of what my life used to be, I'm on my way to rebuilding it. No longer a pawn in someone else's mess, I finally glimpse a future not overshadowed by debt or despair. And who knows, maybe one day, I'll be able to recount this experience with laughter rather than anxiety. Update: it's been a few months since I faced those demons, and while my finances are still shaky, I've taken the plunge into freelance work myself, learning graphic design to help others express their stories as mine once were silenced. I still hear about Alex, and the troubling stories coming from our old neighborhood, but the thought of returning to that life of shame and fear makes my heart feel lighter. I'm still working through it all, one graphic at a time. As the months rolled on, I found solace in the rhythmic cadence of my new freelance life, where each keystroke and brushstroke brought me deeper into a world where creativity flourished, unfettered by the chains of past mistakes. I had made a conscious choice to leave behind the weight of my debts and the lingering shadow of that encounter with the Mafia. It was as if I had finally taken off a pair of shoes that were 2 sizes too small. My small apartment morphed into an art studio, with sketches lining the walls and a cluttered desk that spoke to the fervor of my newfound passions. While the stained glass light of the setting sun streamed through my window, I was propelled by an insatiable urge to tell stories, my own stories, but also those of others who had suffered the same silencing I once endured. I reflected on the way the narrative had transformed within me, where once I felt shackled by shame, I now carried a sense of purpose, using my experiences not only to avoid the dark clutches of my past but to illuminate the paths of others. Freelancing was unpredictable, and some weeks the tenuous security of my finances tugged at my nerves, but each job brought in just enough to keep me afloat, like a small buoy in choppy waters. One particular project, a visual narrative about the struggles of an up-and-coming musician trapped under the thumb of a greedy label, struck a chord with me. As I crafted illustrations that mirrored his struggles, I recalled the tight grip of fear that once held my world in check. I couldn't help but channel some of my own anxieties into that work. It felt comforting to remember that artists often pulled from their wells of pain, transforming turmoil into something beautiful. And with each completed assignment, a thrill coursed through me, not just because of the paycheck but because I was helping someone tell their story, lifting it from the confines of silence. But still, there were days when silence became an unwelcome visitor, nudging me with memories of that life I had fled. I occasionally ran into old acquaintances from the neighborhood during errand runs, their faces painted with lingering questions that only I could read. I felt their curiosity piercing through the tentative smiles they offered. Did I ever pay off my debts? Was I still in danger of repercussions? I found myself dodging these encounters, feeling as if they were unwelcome echoes of a past I wished to bury. Despite this unease, I strategically avoided any discussions surrounding that chapter of my life, substituting small talk with a wall of careful deflection. The further I drifted from Alex, the friend who had led me to those dark shores, the more I began to understand that this new boundary was necessary. I still cared for what he once meant to me, but friendships shaped in desperation often lost their footing, particularly in the face of dire circumstances. There were days when I felt the pangs of guilt, remembering how I had distanced myself from him, yet I reminded myself that sometimes the hardest decisions are those we make for our own well-being. I had to be my own priority, and in this, I understood that self-care was essential in untying myself from the anchors of fear I had once known. Life took on a different rhythm after that. I kept to my routine of early mornings filled with coffee and quiet contemplation, where I regrouped and recharged before jumping into the whirlwind of deadlines and projects. I reached out to supportive platforms online where I could share what I had learned about graphic design, allowing me to inspire others hoping to escape from their own silent stories. Every connection felt like an act of reclamation. I soon realized that while life's challenges might not erase themselves, we hold the power to choose how we face them. And just when I thought I had built up enough distance from my intertwined past, I received a message one night, a notification that sent a chill down my spine. It was a cryptic message from a number I didn't recognize, void of any context, simply reading, "We need to talk." My heart raced and dread pooled in my stomach. Had Alex reached out? Or was there someone else looking to pull me back into that life, a reminder that I could never truly escape the consequences of my choices? In the end, I chose hope over fear, deciding to respond. I was done with the shadows of my past. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about standing firm in the life I had built. If there was any offer or threat lurking behind that message, I would face it head on, not as the scared person I once was, but as an empowered individual who learned to express rather than suppress. With every breath, I reminded myself that I owed my life to those unyielding graphics I created, each a testament to resilience, an ode to stories that needed to be shared. If there was anything I had learned from this chapter, it's that I wouldn't let my past dictate my future. One way or another, I would write my own ending. As the months rolled by, I found myself lost in the rhythm of my new life, my mornings filled with the sound of digital brushes sweeping across my tablet, and my evenings immersed in a vibrant community of fellow creators who understood the struggles of battling inner demons. Those dark days of financial turmoil and mob connections felt like distant memories, mere shadows in the bright glow of my newfound identity. But every so often, a chill would creep into my soul, and I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the looming figures from my past return to collect what was owed. It was in those moments that I focused on the projects at hand, pouring my heart into each design as if it were my very lifeline. I attended design meetups and workshops, shared my works in progress on social media, and even started offering my services to local nonprofits, knowing how healing storytelling can be. I spoke with clients who, like me, carried burdens of their own, and through visual narratives, I could help them uncover and express their truths, much like my own. Yet, inquisitiveness sometimes took over, especially when I heard whispers about Alex, my old neighbor whose heavy footsteps and menacing glances had once suffocated me with fear. Rumors traveled through our circles like wildfire, tales of his increasingly desperate and reckless actions. It made me a bit anxious, knowing that he could still be out there. One night, after a long day of collaborating on a mural for mental health awareness, I found myself at a local cafe, fiddling with the remnants of my latte, contemplating whether I should reach out to some of my old friends. I wanted to ask, just to get some sense of the neighborhood without stepping back into the lion's den. Hesitations bubbled within me, a mix of urgency and dread, knowing that once you tread back into someone else's world, your past could pull you back in like a riptide. But ultimately, I decided to stay put, cloaked in the security of my new identity. I busied myself with deadlines, balancing aesthetics with client expectations, and reveling in the flow of creativity. Soon, my portfolio burgeoned with pieces that resonated with people far and wide, art both whimsical and sobering. However, what started as therapy gradually morphed into a burgeoning business, and as my confidence grew, so too did my ambition. I scheduled a meeting with a small gallery, eager to showcase my work, relishing the thought of presenting my stories in a public forum, where perhaps others could find healing and inspiration. The night of the gallery opening was a mosaic of excitement and anxiety. I wore a dress that felt too tight and polished my illustrations to pristine perfection. As I stood by my booth, chatting with curious onlookers about my creative process, I felt a sense of pride enveloping me. For the first time, I could see the fruits of my labor unfolding, liberating stories grasping for air in this vibrant, public space. But deep down, the familiar gnawing of insecurity persisted. What if someone recognized me as the girl who had been tangled in mafia ties? Then, just as I found solace in the supportive chatter around me, the door swung open, and my heart sank. There he stood, Alex, just as I remembered him, but sharper, with a hardness in his eyes that felt chillingly familiar. Time had transformed him, muting some of the buoyancy we'd once shared while hardening his features into something menacing. I thought about slinking away or hiding behind my easel, but instead, I stood my ground, breathing deeply, reminding myself of the evolution I'd undergone. The world fell silent as he approached me, a casual expression plastered over his face, piercing me with a penetrating gaze. I braced myself, ready to stand up to the image of fear I had once carried. "Congratulations," he said, his tone surprisingly even. "I heard you're doing well for yourself," he continued, scanning my artwork, which was now a testament to my resilience, my freedom. He seemed genuine, but I couldn't shake the weight of uncertainty. "Thanks, Alex," I replied, my voice steady, the apprehension coiling within me like a tight spring. "You too, I've heard things." I chose my words carefully, every syllable curated to extract a hint at his intentions. He shrugged, and a shadow crossed his face, the facade managing to slip ever so slightly. "Just trying to stay afloat, like anyone else," he said, an edge creeping back into his voice, hinting at bygone days where our lives were intertwined through fear. The conversation felt like a precarious dance, and I was eager to end it before the tempo shifted unfavorably. "But things are different now," I said firmly, allowing every word to hit the air like a splash of cold water. He nodded, but I could see the faintest trace of regret flicker in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess we all change. Anyway, good to see you doing well," he muttered, stepping back, a reluctant smile grazing his lips before he vanished into the crowd. The weight of that moment hung in the air long after he left, my heart racing as adrenaline surged through me. I stepped back into my booth, enveloped by the warmth of my friends and admirers, and I felt that perhaps those old stories didn't have much power over me anymore. As the night winded down, strangers offered congratulations, and I even captured a few moments in photographs, each image creating its own narrative of overcoming and resilience. Each laugh exchanged and each compliment offered was a reminder that I had taken control of my story, rewriting it one brushstroke at a time. I may have owed my past a small portion of my existence, but my future? That was entirely mine to shape. And what a beautiful work of art it had become. Confession: I, F18, have lived alone for 3 years in my own apartment. It might sound freedom-filled to many, especially those still grappling with curfews and the chaos of family life, but my solitude was woven from threads of loneliness, longing, and something else darker that I hadn't expected. When I signed the lease as a naive 16-year-old, I thought living alone would be a thrilling adventure brimming with newfound independence, but that initial excitement quickly morphed into an unforeseen isolation. My friends drifted away, busy with their own lives, and when I wrapped myself in the silence of my one bedroom, I started feeling like a ghost who haunted her own home. It began innocently enough, the occasional creak of the floorboards in the dead of night, tiny movements out of the corner of my eye that I brushed off as the remnants of a mundane day, when shadows appeared to grow longer. Yet my mind couldn't help but fill those gaps with questions. Was someone else in my apartment? Had I inadvertently invited a paranormal entity into my life through my self-imposed isolation? Just last week, as I curled on my couch with a blanket and a half-empty cup of cold tea, I caught a glimpse of somebody, small and fleeting, scutter behind my bookcase. I froze, my heart racing, and reason told me that it was just a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the confines of my apartment held more than my simple belongings and scattered hopes. Curiosity grew into obsession as I spent my days searching through online forums and haunted house documentaries, tearing apart my sanity in the pursuit of understanding what lurked just beyond perception. Conversations with friends now consisted of nervous laughter and vague references to weird things in my apartment, as I tried not to show them how deeply unsettling the idea of my living situation had become. Then came the night I finally mustered enough courage to confront what I believed hid within my walls. Armed with a flashlight, I stood in the dim glow of my living room, my heartbeats echoing louder than any noise of the night. I ventured towards the bookcase, muttering to myself that ghosts were absurd, merely figments of an overactive imagination, and carefully, I tilted the furniture enough to peer behind it. My breath hitched as I saw not a ghost but a collection of items: a small, tattered teddy bear, a threadbare blanket, and crumpled pieces of paper covered in scribbles. They were dated, each note a fragment from someone's life squeezed into the space I had thought was solely mine. The notes told a story of sorrow, of someone who had lived there before me, trapped in an unbearable life, and after reading them, I felt a burgeoning empathy for the spirit that once inhabited my home. I realized that my isolation had echoed theirs, a continuous void that gnawed at the edges of happiness. As the days turned into weeks, I began writing letters to that person, sharing my fears, my dreams, and my confessions, about loneliness, about resilience, about wanting to reclaim the space where darkness had once settled. In those late-night scribbles, I started to feel a shift within myself. The burden I had carried began to lift as I bared my soul to the whispers that haunted my hallways. One letter brought an unexpected sense of closure. I realized I could take control of my own narrative instead of allowing the narratives of others, those who had left pieces of themselves behind, to dictate my life. I chose to embrace the solitude, to restore joy within the echo of silence rather than fear it. I decided that it was time to breathe new life into my apartment. Colors replaced the chipped walls, plants breathed verdancy into the once stark corners, and each adjustment felt like a step away from the ghosts of my past, toward a future filled with light. As for the lingering remnants of whoever had come before me, I left their notes nestled in a box with the teddy bear, placing it on a shelf I reserved for cherished memories, reminding myself that our pains often intertwine but do not define us. For the first time in years, my home truly felt like mine. I am no longer living alone, I am discovering myself, and perhaps that was the most profound resolution of all. I know that others may have struggled in similar spaces, so I want to share this tiny epiphany with them. Loneliness can spark fear, but it can also ignite a journey of self-compassion and understanding. Update: a couple of weeks after writing those letters, I woke up to the doorbell ringing persistently. I opened it to find a delivery driver with a package that bore my name. Inside was an unassuming frame, holding my favorite note from that box. Someone had found it and sent it with a sweet card that simply read, "You matter." It might have been a complete coincidence, but in that moment, I felt a sense of connection to the world that I never thought possible in my solitary apartment. I smiled, acknowledging the spectral whispers but no longer captive to them, allowing instead the gentle reminder of belonging to guide me, my once lonely refuge transformed into a sanctuary. This simple act of kindness sparked something deep within me, a flicker of warmth I hadn't felt in years. It was as if the universe was gently nudging me to acknowledge that this solitary life I had carved out wasn't just an existence filled with shadows, but a story filled with possibilities, marked by the serendipity that brought that note back to me at just the right time. Instead of wallowing in my solitude, I found myself daydreaming, imagining connections, friendships, maybe even a sense of community. The thought of meeting someone new didn't seem so daunting anymore. After all, had I not just received a message from a stranger that resonated deeply with my heart? The next day, I ventured out, a little timidly, but with a sort of hopeful determination that was new for me. I stepped into the small cafe down the street from my apartment, the Nook. It was cozy, with the faint aroma of coffee and pastries wafting through the air, wrapping around me like a warm hug. I ordered a chai latte and found myself a corner seat, where I could observe the life bustling around me. I watched people laughing together, sharing stories or moments of quiet companionship, and it reinvigorated a sense of excitement within me. I was struck by the realization that each of them had a story, just like mine, full of struggles and small victories, sheltered within their laughter and chatter. I picked up my journal and began to write, letting the words flow freely from my head to the page. I poured everything into that small notebook, my silly fears, hopes, and musings about life, weaving the fabric of my lonely nights into something vibrant, a tapestry of my solitude transformed. As I left the cafe that day, I felt lighter, a swift breeze danced around me, as if it too was whispering encouragement. Days turned into weeks, and I started making this a routine. My infrequent visits to the cafe blossomed into warm exchanges with the barista, Jennifer, who always remembered my order and threw in an extra pastry on slow days. Then there was Michael, an artist who frequented my corner table, sketching the patrons, and who eventually joined me one afternoon, sharing snippets of his artistic journey while I shared pieces of mine. Each interaction chipped away at the walls I had built around myself, and slowly, I began to see my apartment less like a fortress and more like a resting place, a canvas to dream on, instead of hiding within. I meticulously filled my space with mementos from an enriching life, photos of us laughing at quirky art shows, postcards from old friends, and even framed snippets of conversations that struck a chord. I still had the spectral whispers, but instead of haunting me, they enveloped me in a comforting embrace, an acknowledgement that I was not alone in my experiences anymore. I was a part of something greater, a beautiful life tangled with shared stories, laughter, and creativity. It was one evening, under the soft glow of warm string lights on my balcony, that an unexpected message lit up my phone. It was from the same anonymous number I had received the note from all those weeks ago. My heart raced as I read, "Hi. Where can I send another little something? It felt good to connect, and I would love to remind you again that you matter." My breath caught in my throat, that same warmth rushing back through me, not quite believing the world could be this kind. We exchanged a few messages that evening, the conversation so genuine and easy, as if we had known each other forever despite that initial anonymity. And just like that, a new friendship emerged, filled with laughter and support, reminding me that sometimes, amidst the fog of loneliness, it takes just one little connection to illuminate the path back to oneself. The specters of my past still visited, but now, they merely served to enhance the pieces of life I was reclaiming, quiet reminders of where I had been, which now felt like distant echoes against the symphony of laughter and companionship I was cultivating. I closed my eyes that evening, the cool breeze lightly rustling the leaves, and I smiled softly to myself, feeling a profound sense of belonging within my heart. And even though I had embraced solitude in the past, I was learning to dance a delicate waltz between presence and absence, discovering beauty in both the quiet times alone and the raucous laughter shared. A few weeks later, I received another note, this time not anonymous but signed, Kara, who turned out to be the mysterious sender who had ignited this journey of self-discovery. And though I still cherished my moments of solitude, I had finally learned that reaching out for connection wouldn't drown out my independent spirit but rather complement it. As the seasons shifted outside my window, so too did my perspective, as I rested comfortably in this place I now called home, my sanctuary, filled with the echoes of laughter, art, and an unshakable sense of belonging, a reminder that amidst the chaos of life, we always have the choice to nurture both solitude and companionship, creating a tapestry that is uniquely ours, interwoven with every meaningful connection we dare to make. With the arrival of that unexpected package, a seed had been planted deep within me, urging me to extend my hand beyond the boundaries of my cherished solitude. It was a kind of quiet revolution that felt secure, as if the walls of my apartment had started to lean in a little closer, helping me embrace the world outside. Days turned into weeks, and as the last vestiges of winter surrendered to the warmth of spring, I found myself living harmoniously with my new mindset. The park nearby, once a neglected thought, became an inviting breath of fresh air where I would occasionally. I had always been the kind of person who thrived on routine. I woke up every weekday at the same time, enjoyed a cup of coffee while watching the sun rise, and headed to my job as a project manager at a small tech firm. It was steady, predictable, and frankly, comforting. But recently, I found myself on the brink of a significant change. I was about to start my paternity leave. The irony was that I had no child to take leave for. Instead, I had conjured up an elaborate story about impending fatherhood, a tale that began innocently enough but spiraled way beyond my control. You see, I wasn't exactly the confident social butterfly my colleagues believed me to be. I was a 30-something man living alone, with a life filled mostly with work and the solitude of my small apartment. I had always admired the family-oriented lives of my teammates, where evening conversations revolved around children's milestones and playful anecdotes. It seeped into my consciousness, nudging me to share a piece of my future that, while imaginative, didn't actually exist. At a recent office gathering, surrounded by the usual jovial jokes and chatter, I casually dropped the mention of my soon-to-arrive baby. What I intended as a throwaway line turned into a surge of interest and excitement as well-wishers insisted I share updates. The concerning part was that, when I felt compelled to clarify that this was real, I could have easily admitted the truth. Instead, something inside me, a mix of fear and the thrill of being part of something bigger than myself, kept me weaving lies about an unseen little one. I concocted an elaborate backstory, detailing the complex logistics that my partner and I navigated, crafting a perfect facade with every conversation. Yet, as the days passed, the weight of my deception grew unbearable, punctuated by questioning colleagues who eagerly looked forward to my impending fatherhood. Days turned into weeks, and to my horror, paternity leave became more than just a nice gesture from HR, it transformed into a looming obligation. I couldn't face the idea of returning to work after a month and having to explain the absence of a child. What if they expected baby pictures? What if they wanted to meet my partner, the co-parent whose existence I had fabricated? Panic had begun to creep in, fueled by guilt and anxiety. I spent sleepless nights picturing my colleagues' reactions when they discovered that not only was I not becoming a father, but also that I had spun this elaborate tale just to feel included in conversations. I often caught myself staring at the empty nursery I had started to imagine, filled with toys I planned to pick up during my sporadic trips to the store, never bought, never needed. The moment weighed heavily on me. I rode the bus home one evening, feeling a bitter mixture of shame and sadness. Did I really need to create this barrier between me and my colleagues? The truths of my mundane life began to gnaw at me, how I yearned to be one of them, sharing heartfelt parenting tales instead of fading into the background. And just when I thought I might crumble under the pressure of my elaborate deception, something unexpected happened. I overheard a chat at work, two colleagues discussing their own struggles with parenthood. Suddenly, there it was, the relief in knowing that they were facing their own hurdles and not living the seemingly perfect lives I had imagined. Maybe, just maybe, everyone had their battles. That idea sparked a faint glimmer of hope. I finally mustered the courage to confront my lie. The next day, I gathered my closest teammates and, with pounding heart and shaky hands, admitted the truth. I spoke openly about my outrageous tale and laid bare my insecurities. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then laughter erupted, not at my expense, but in solidarity. They shared their own moments of pretending, their struggles with feelings of inadequacy, and suddenly, I felt a weight lift. The fears I thought would alienate me had instead connected me deeper to each of them. Now, here I was on the eve of my supposed paternity leave, without a child but with something much more valuable, a newfound connection and understanding that we all have our unique stories, often woven with threads of self-doubt and longing for belonging. As I prepared to walk into this new chapter of life, I took a deep breath, relieved that, although there might not be a crib to put together, I had certain friends who would share their paths to parenthood with me, and who would support me through my next adventure, whatever that may be. Update: a few weeks after that confession, I received an unexpected surprise. One of my colleagues reached out to me, suggesting we should start a support group for those of us navigating the complexities of adulthood, parenting or not. It felt surreal, and for the first time, I was excited to step outside my routine and forge genuine connections. Helping each other through our different life challenges became a new adventure, turning my fabricated narrative into a meaningful community of shared experiences and understanding. I often reflect on that moment when I faced my truth and how it unfolded into something I never expected, a connection that not only relieved my guilt but also led me into a richer, more fulfilling chapter of life. It was a Friday evening, the kind of evening that drapes the world in a soft, hazy light as day surrenders to dusk. I sat at my kitchen table, swirling a spoon around in an almost empty mug of lukewarm coffee while lost in thought, my mind still buzzing from the recent support group meeting we'd organized. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. Instead, there was a shared authenticity in the room, a collective understanding that wrapped around me like a warm blanket. The people in that small gathering ranged from new parents overwhelmed by their responsibilities to those not yet ready to embrace the title of adult. Each person brought their own struggles, stories that intertwined in unexpected ways, making me realize no one was truly alone in their fears and uncertainties. I recalled how Janet, a single mother, had shared her battles with anxiety, and Timmy, who was still figuring out college, spoke up about the suffocating pressure to succeed. Each story was a reminder of the fragility and complexity of adulthood, and I found myself nodding along, feeling both their pain and their courage. As the weeks progressed, our group blossomed. What began as a mere flicker of understanding ignited into a vibrant community that met every Thursday evening. Laughter echoed through my living room, mixed with vulnerable confessions and supportive nods. It was heartwarming, and I relished in the sense of community we cultivated. The guilt around my fabricated narrative of impending fatherhood ebbed away, replaced by a profound realization that we were all figuring life out together, and that really, we were all a little lost. I often caught myself smiling during those evenings, and the sound of voices filled with warmth and humor became my favorite backdrop. But I was faced with a new dilemma one night as I was putting together snacks before our meeting. I received a call from my younger sister, Amanda, who had just returned home from a whirlwind trip to Europe. Her excitement was palpable through the phone, but it wasn't long before she veered into more serious territory. Amid her stories about the Eiffel Tower and canals of Venice, she mentioned how she was finally ready to settle down, to talk about the next step in her life, which obviously involves starting a family. The weight of that conversation pressed down on my chest like a heavy stone. I felt a pang of panic surge, the reality of my deception gnawed at my insides. What would she think if she ever found out that I had concocted a tale of impending fatherhood to avoid the pressures surrounding my life choices, especially now that she was ready to embrace that path? Would it all unravel? In a moment of desperation, I decided to confide in Amanda during a quiet moment, carefully weighing my words. I hoped that within my revelation, she would find the humor or lightness to soften the blow. You know, I've been on this wild journey where I've pretended to be something I didn't think I could handle, I began, and she listened intently, her laughter easing the tension in my heart. I told her how raising a child had allowed me to see my own struggles through a different lens, paving the way for connections I never thought I'd cultivate. To my surprise, Amanda found my crafted story amusing and insightful rather than shocking. It sounds like you're navigating adulthood better than most, she chuckled, and isn't that what we're all doing anyway? Faking it until we make it? Her lightheartedness released the tight grasp of anxiety I had been holding on to, and we spent the rest of the evening discussing our dreams and aspirations, not anchored solely on parenthood but rather on the broader realities of life, a tapestry woven with threads of hope, uncertainty, and laughter. With Amanda's unwavering support, I felt a new sense of freedom wash over me, a relief that perhaps my little charade wasn't a shameful secret but rather just one of the many ways we discover our authentic selves through vulnerability. Reflecting on the friendships I had formed, I realized that this journey was less about the lies I had spun and more about the beautiful truths that emerged from them. As I settled into bed later that night, I considered how liberating it felt to embrace honesty not only with others but with myself. No longer would I anchor my identity in fear or pretense. Instead, I would step boldly into the unknown with all its imperfections. And just like that, my life felt whole again, accepting the beauty and chaos in every chapter, connected by the threads of shared humanity. Update: it's been a few months since that conversation with Amanda. Lifelong friendships have flourished, and I've taken an active role in advocating for mental health awareness in our community, inspired by the stories shared in our group. The fear of being exposed as a fake parent is now a distant memory. The narrative I once felt burdened by has transformed into a beacon for others seeking solace in their struggles. This experience opened doors and paved paths for authenticity in my relationships. I've even started volunteering at local youth centers, hoping to share the lessons I've learned in this winding road of adulthood. As for Amanda, she's expecting. Turns out, my penchant for fabricated stories led me and my sister into a new reality, one that's filled with warmth, laughter, and genuine connection. Who knew that embracing the truth about myself could blossom into such sincerities? Life is certainly unpredictable, but I've never felt more ready to embrace it. In the months since I admitted the truth to myself and to Amanda, I've felt an overwhelming sense of purpose settle into my daily life. The support group I started has grown beyond what I originally envisioned. It's become a source of strength not just for me, but for several others who share similar stories of struggle, miscommunication, and the fear of falling short in adulthood. Each meeting feels like a gathering of old friends, people from different walks of life, yet united by a common thread of searching for authenticity in a world that sometimes feels disingenuous. We sit in a cozy circle at the community center, armed with coffee cups that warm our hands and hearts, inviting the soft glow of shared vulnerability. I've learned to listen more than I speak, letting others express their frustrations and triumphs as they navigate the chaotic waters of adult responsibilities and expectations. Amanda's pregnancy has added a delightful twist to it all. The excitement radiating from her is infectious. We often discuss nursery themes and baby names during our group, blurring the lines between support and friendship. It's as though the universe conspired to deepen my connections with those around me, threading their lives into my own, and I've found beauty in the unpredictable nature of it all. I marvel at how life was once about spinning stories and creating facades, and now it is vibrant, full of real conversations and shared laughter. We've even started planning community events, like game nights and potlucks, where each of us can bring something to share: food, tales, laughter, or simply our presence. I remember the palpable tension I felt when I first confessed my lies about impending fatherhood. It was an avalanche of fear and isolation. Yet, here I am, surrounded by people who celebrate honesty in its many forms. We all have our burdens, and together, we lift them slightly, making them easier to carry. One evening, during one of our meetings, a new member shared that they had spent years crafting a seemingly perfect life on social media, only to feel a gnawing emptiness. As she spoke, I could see her raw vulnerability spark something in the others, each person resonating with her words as if they were echoes of their own hidden truths. It struck me then that our meetings had transformed into a sanctuary where we could strip away our facades and embrace our authentic selves, imperfections and all. It was a revelation for many of us, realizing that the messiness of life is actually what makes it beautiful. Soon, I found myself reflecting on my past choices, letting go of the guilt that once anchored me. The lies I told to dodge the harshness of reality had morphed into a transformative pathway, leading me to self-discovery and clarity. I attended workshops on mindfulness, delving into journaling practices, and even explored meditation, learning how to center myself amidst life's storms. It felt surreal to wake up each day, not dreading the mundane, but eagerly anticipating the lessons each moment could present. As Amanda's due date drew nearer, we laughed and planned, aware of the whirlwind to come, but profoundly grateful for the community we had forged amidst the chaos. I often found myself thinking about how life led me here, To this extraordinary confluence of honesty, responsibility, and connection, not despite my earlier fabrications, but because of them. Each day was less about the anxiety of adulthood, and more about celebrating each small victory and communal joy. As I knelt in the nursery one afternoon, painting the walls soft pastel colors, I couldn't help but feel that life's unpredictable nature was not a hindrance, but rather a tapestry allowing us to weave our shared experiences into something greater. I looked forward to welcoming Amanda's baby into a world filled with love, laughter, and honest engagement. As the figure of a new life loomed near, I recognized that my journey was far from over. It was only the beginning of a newfound adventure, one where every unscripted moment would reveal the beauty and authenticity. And though the unexpected twists and turns would remain part of my life, I now embraced them with a heart ready for what might come next. It was the kind of day that drags, one of those afternoons where the sun seems to hang just a little too long in the sky, every tick of the clock echoing through the quiet of my small therapy office, where I usually found solace among my books and wobbly old chairs. After a morning filled with mundane cases, anxiety, a sprinkle of depression, the usual suspects, my final appointment came in the form of a new patient who, unknown to me at the time, would shake the very foundation of my moral compass. When he walked in, I wasn't prepared for the weight of his presence. He was stooped but imposing, a heaviness about him that seemed to suppress the air. He introduced himself as Victor, and I could tell from his accent that he was not from around here. I later learned he was from a war-torn country far removed from my well-insulated suburban existence. At first glance, he appeared like any patient, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of nightmares and shadows. He sat in the chair across from me, those haunted eyes narrowing even further when I caught a glimpse of the scars, physical and otherwise, etched into his skin. "You have to promise not to judge," he said, a quiver in his voice revealing a hint of vulnerability. "I'm not who you think I am." It was an invitation and a warning, as if reality were temporarily suspended, and I found myself leaning forward, curious. As the session unfolded, Victor let slip snippets of his life, recounting tales of violence and chaos that would make a horror movie pale in comparison. He spoke of choices, of battles fought not only against enemies but against his own conscience, and I was struck by the absurdity of it all. I was confiding in a war criminal, a man culpable of atrocities I read about in history books. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on me. What constitutes a person? Should I extend him the compassion I offered all my patients, or could he be irredeemable? As the weeks dragged on, I grew attached to Victor in ways I never anticipated. Each session grew increasingly intimate, laden with discussions of guilt, human nature, and the cyclical nature of violence. He was both a monster and a man seeking redemption. I began to find beauty in his tragic story, bewildered by how he reflected my own fears back at me. Maybe I wasn't just a therapist healing others but a fragile human being grasping for connection in a world teeming with horror. But one fateful afternoon, everything shifted. As he spoke of his past, of time spent wondering whose lives he had claimed in the name of war, a phone call interrupted our session. I instinctively picked up, only to hear a voice crackling on the other end. "We know who he is. He's a wanted man." My heart stammered. The confrontation of my unspoken fears had arrived at my doorstep. Shame surged through me for even allowing myself to feel sympathy for him. The line between right and wrong blurred starkly in that moment, and I widely opened my eyes, desperately searching for some illumination within Victor's steady gaze. "Do you know what you're doing?" I asked him, an accusatory whisper escaping my lips. To my shock, he smiled softly, an expression of understanding and serene acceptance. "I'm trying to come home," he replied, words heavy with implication. In that moment, I realized I had not just been his therapist but a kindred spirit. We sat in silence, a suffocating tension enveloping us as I battled with my professional duty against an unsettling sense of betrayal by my own empathy. When the session ended, my heart remained heavy, complicated, and confused. I didn't actually care, who had he been before? The person who sat across from me was alive, vulnerable, and paradoxically engrossing. The lines we often draw based on societal norms began to dissolve like sugar in warm water, leaving me disoriented yet intrigued, just wishing for clarity that never arrived. Weeks passed, and I knew I was facing a crossroads. I had to decide, continue treating him and risk my own conscience or sever ties altogether, never allowing the flicker of his humanity to shimmer in my mind again. In the end, I chose to continue our sessions, not because I believed he deserved forgiveness, but because, admittedly, I reveled in the complexity of his existence. I was learning about the human condition in its rawest form. The Psychiatric Association's guidelines, the law, my own moral compass, they all paled against the tapestry of human life I was slowly unraveling. I had not abandoned my ethics but instead had discovered a deeper narrative woven into Victor's story, one that transcended mere black and white thinking. I drifted further into this uncharted territory, committing myself to this man's journey toward redemption, even if it meant grappling with my own shadows along the way. For now, we would wade through the murky waters together, pieces of history intertwined, until clarity illuminated the darkness, if it ever would. Months later, I still found myself reflecting on that initial encounter, how I'd crossed paths with a war criminal who, while undeniably flawed, taught me a profound lesson in humanity. In the end, perhaps without the spark of madness that ignited this unlikely connection, healing could not have truly begun. As I continued my therapy practice, I found comfort in knowing that sometimes understanding rises from the ashes of the past, and the courage to face those shadows becomes a beautiful journey all on its own. As the months continued to unfold, I settled back into the rhythm of my therapy practice, letting the echoes of that initial encounter quiet down, but they never fully dissipated. The ember of our shared experience remained, quietly glowing in the recesses of my mind. My days were usually filled with the mundane yet gratifying tasks of helping others navigate their own turmoil, ordinary sessions punctuated by the lilting sounds of laughter or the occasional sob spilling forth beneath my watchful, empathetic gaze. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't occasionally grapple with the strange weight of what I learned from my time with him, the man who carried remnants of war upon his shoulders, whose very name echoed like thunder in the stillness of moral conversation. We had exchanged stories that clung to the air between us, tough tales mottled with blood, but juxtaposed by his stark vulnerability. There was a surreal paradox in the way he navigated his undying guilt, the burden of lives lost and the iron chains of memory that clanked heavily in the quiet confines of our sessions. I knew, deep down, that some might balk at the very concept of treating such a soul. Disillusioned by my commitment, they would see this as a grave misstep driven by an overzealous idealism that turned a blind eye to the darker shades of morality. But for me, it evolved into a personal pilgrimage, peeling away layers to uncover something both terrifying and exquisite hidden within the human experience. Despite his history, I felt a task far greater than indictment rested upon my shoulders. It was about bridges and understanding, and the ache of recognizing that every antagonist could very well be a protagonist spun into the wrong story. The sun dipped low over the horizon in a golden farewell most evenings as I closed up shop, and each time I brushed past that creaky door, my thoughts would inevitably drift to him. That connection had shaped every earnest "how are you feeling?" and the gentle nudges toward progress I offered my clients. His haunting presence was like a ghost that had woven itself into the fabric of my life, an uninvited friend who refused to leave. Then came the day when he slipped back into my life, almost effortlessly, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. The clinic's phone rang with an urgency that promptly shattered my thoughts. I answered, only to hear his gravelly voice across the line, the kind that had once stuttered halting truths, now noticeably aged, echoing with fatigue. "I need to talk again," he said, a tremor in his tone, laden with either desperation or hope, perhaps both. My heart sank at the unease lining his words, a reminder of vulnerability sharper than glass. "Of course," I replied, a practiced calm enveloping my own bubbling uncertainty. "When would you like to come in?" We arranged for the next day, and as I hung up, the familiar anticipation flooded my veins, tangled with strands of anxiety. Despite all he'd shared, I wondered just how far the edges of his redemption could stretch. He arrived the following afternoon, a spectral sight clad in shadows and what felt like an ocean of burdens. We exchanged muted greetings, the weight of past sessions settling around us like an oppressive fog. I offered him a seat, the worn fabric whispering against the chair as he sank into it. His eyes were tired but kept alert, deeply searching as if willing me to see the fragments of a man who had been stripped down to the core. "I can't shake it," he admitted, his voice a raw whisper that sliced through the air. "The faces, the screams, they're all still there. I thought talking would help, but..." His words trailed off, leaving a palpable silence that bloomed between us. It felt familiar, each rhythm of his voice resonating with the resonance of our prior discussions, yet the frailness of his current state drew a stark contrast against the usually firm man before me. "I need a reason to keep going," he finally confessed, his anguish laid bare. It dawned on me then, the forgiveness he sought wasn't merely for himself, it was for the world outside, a world that had spun on without acknowledging the depths of his plight. I paused, crafting my words as carefully as a sculptor chiseling a marble block. "You've been through an unimaginable experience, and it's okay to grieve what you've lost, including parts of yourself. Encouragement was met with a deluge of bottled experiences spilling forth. He spoke of harrowing nights haunted by memories of despair and fleeting moments of humanity amid the devastation. It was an outpouring that spilled out over the juxtaposition of life and death, a hammer striking an already fragile heart. I listened closely, offering comfort and space for him to release his burdens. As he shared, I realized that my mere presence was creating a safe sanctuary for his pain. And in return, he was handing me insights into the complexity of humanity, the darkness intertwined with light, the monster wrapped in flesh yearning for understanding. The session meandered along the delicate threads of healing, and when it ended, a smile tugged at my lips. In that moment, what we found was shared resilience, a pact of empathy forged anew. As he walked out, lighter than when he entered, I felt our connection soothe my spirit. Outside my window, the sun dipped below the jagged edges of the horizon, casting everything in a glow that felt almost like fresh beginnings. Somehow, we had salvaged something vibrant from the depths, two souls crafted in fire, sharing an understanding that transcended mere shame or vilification. I knew then, in the ebbs and flows of life, we all carry shadows, but it's how we embrace the light that becomes the heartbeat of our stories. Months would pass again, but this wound would no longer press against the fabric of my soul. It was simply a reminder that healing takes many forms, and sometimes the bravest act one can perform is choosing to understand. It was early morning when I received the call that stirred distant memories, pulling me back into the realm of what had once felt like a fever dream. The familiar tone of my office phone cut through the stillness, echoing in the small, softly lit space where I often found respite among the flood of paperwork and therapy notes. The voice on the other end introduced itself as someone from the local clinic. A quick review of my ongoing cases had flagged some lingering concerns regarding one particular patient, Roberto. His name alone conjured an inexplicable mix of emotions. The bond we had forged itched at the edges of my consciousness, reminding me of the chaotic intersection of darkness and light that had forever changed how I viewed suffering and redemption. The directive was straightforward. I must assess his mental state again, as his behavior had begun to spiral back into the shadows. Soft murmurs of concern flared as I listened to the details, words like inappropriate outbursts and intense expressiveness wrapping themselves around the narrative of a man who had once been untouchable in my office, an enigma I had been compelled to understand. A part of me, however reluctant, was ready for this renewed confrontation. I held tightly to the memory of those long sessions where we navigated the raw, jagged edges of each other's truths, his tales of war, chillingly layered with nuance, and my responses, steeped in empathy, attempting to thaw the frozen armor he had forged through a lifetime of conflict. I could still picture him leaning forward, almost animated at times, as he recounted snippets from his past, the smell of distant gunfire, the weight of choices that even fate could not preordain. What had once felt like a burden to sift through now shimmered with the fervor of transformation, reshaping how healing could truly take form. I wondered if I could be his guide again, helping him inch back toward the flickering warmth we had discovered together. When I arrived at the small clinic, the air was heavy with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and unshakable tension. The waiting area felt eerily tranquil, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above as anxious patients clung to the pages of dog-eared self-help books. Roberto sat in the far corner, casting an imperceptible shadow against the walls painted in pastel blues, his hands tight around the frayed edges of his sleeves. Those familiar dark circles encircling his eyes told stories of sleepless nights, of memories refusing to fade. Our eyes met, and within that glance lay everything we had shared, the traumatic echoes of his past and the promise of exploration yet to come. The minute I took my seat across from him, the weight of those shared shadows enveloped us again, as immovable as the gravity of unspoken regret. "Are you all right?" I ventured, noting the slight tremor in his clenched fists. He drew a breath, deeply rooted in unease but tinged with resolve, a mix I had grown to recognize in our sessions. "Sometimes the past just doesn't want to stay behind," he replied, his voice gravelly yet strikingly sweet, like a stone plunged into murky waters, creating ripples of reflection. What followed encapsulated moments that were equal parts heartbreaking and enlightening. Stories tumbled out in jagged snippets, each revealing how the weight of his horrific choices felt heavier still in the light of accountability. As I listened, flashes of recognition flickered within me. All of us, in our own ways, were at war with ourselves, battling regret or shame, yet yearning for connection, a bridge between fractured histories and hope. With each session, I cherished the clarity that arose from our encounters, the understanding that slowly morphed from fear into acceptance, both for Roberto and myself. We weren't separate entities, we were interwoven vessels of experience navigating the escalating tide of emotions that threatened to drown us. He spoke of nights he couldn't close his eyes, of whispered faces that haunted him in fleeting dreams, yet with each confession, a pinprick of healing emerged, connecting us through shared vulnerability. One session melted into another, until bizarrely, the notion of guilt transformed into a raw, electrifying energy, less of an anchor and more of a compass guiding him toward understanding himself, even when he didn't completely believe the journey was justifiable. Months turned into a captivating rhythm of sessions, laden with profound exchanges of love, pain, and redemption. It became clear that he was beginning to redefine his narrative, weaving threads that had only previously been tainted in despair. Finding strength in the light, he learned to speak the truth while bearing that heavy weight. Each session felt like we were peeling back layers of a deeply rooted yet beautiful tapestry. I, too, was unearthing pieces of my own self in the process, questions of morality and humanity grappling within my mind, forging renewed perspectives while allowing empathy to flourish like newfound blossoms in early spring. The day he smiled, truly smiled, was etched like magic in my memory. I want to be better. His words fell like gentle raindrops on parched soil, nourishing the parts of him still yearning for acceptance. I nodded, my heart swelling with pride, for here was a warrior unarmed, wrestling the ghosts of a haunting past. Understanding no longer shackled him but inspired him instead. Yet, just when tranquility seemed to blanket our sessions, whispers of unrest emerged from the clinic, echoing through the hallways about a potential release for Roberto. I found myself at a crossroads, battling anxiety as the thought of him re-entering society and grappling with a world reluctant to embrace those who'd once held the weight of war upon their shoulders tugged at my heartstrings. What if this journey of healing, still so raw, was to be disrupted by a society unwilling to forgive? Each day turned into a nebulous haze where hope and dread revealed themselves as two sides of the same coin. I sought solace in my memories of our progress, yet uncertainty loomed like a storm cloud overhead. When the day finally arrived, and the clinic called me in for one last session before his departure, the room felt electric with unspoken farewells. Roberto emerged quietly, almost reverently, his eyes reflecting an agonizing blend of gratitude and apprehension. As we exchanged the final words, a small part of me clung to the idea that I might see him again, managing to insist on finding connection amid the chaos, willing to embrace the discomfort of disparity. As he stood to leave, our eyes met once more, and I could see it, the light flickering in the depths of his gaze, the will to carry the lessons we had unearthed in the sacred space we'd nurtured. No matter where you go, just remember to seek understanding, I said softly. Theirs was both familiar and alien, intricate tapestries made from war and healing, woven together. Months later, the world beyond the clinic hummed with its relentless rhythm, and I reveled in the quiet strength that silently fortified my practice and life. Healing is indeed a labyrinth, I mused, entwined within shadows and light, and as I reflected on the journey, I realized that sometimes the most painful paths illuminate truths long buried, waiting to re-emerge, the enduring truth that every heart holds the universe of battles fought and emotions shared. Perhaps the real journey lay not solely in the act of healing but in the unwavering spirit that rises, ready to embrace love and connection, even in the wake of madness. There's something undeniably peculiar about the way a single conversation can shift the course of your life, a truth I discovered one rainy Wednesday while scrolling through the endless threads of AskReddit. The flat I rented in the heart of Chicago felt especially suffocating that evening. The sound of rain against the window accompanied my feelings of isolation, a stark contrast to the vibrant city outside that buzzed with life. As I read the post titled Ask Reddit People Who Think All These Tariffs Are Beneficial for the US, Why? I was quickly pulled in, my curiosity piqued, and as I delved further into the answers, I became absorbed in the passionate debates over the implications of tariffs on local markets. I had briefly studied economics in college before I pursued my dream of becoming a graphic designer, but I had never really understood how deeply these subjects seeped into everyday lives until I stumbled upon a furious response from a user named Stateless Hand. Stateless Hand was adamant that the tariffs were enriching our country, claiming they helped boost local manufacturing, a sentiment echoed by others who pinned their hopes on the recovery of long-forgotten industries. Infused with their fervor, memories of my parents' struggles ran through my head. They had operated a small apparel business downtown, one of those little family-run shops that fought to survive against the behemoths of fast fashion. I remembered countless evenings spent in the cramped stockroom, listening to them share dreams about a revitalized manufacturing sector buoyed by local trade. That part of my childhood felt like a treasure I had long buried beneath life's responsibilities, now rekindled, thanks to the passionate pleas on the screen before me. Intrigued, I felt compelled to respond, drafting carefully articulated thoughts over the next hour, combining facts and personal anecdotes into a single narrative. I shared my experience in my parents' shop and how tariffs could empower small businesses like theirs, but I also questioned the effectiveness of raising prices on everyday goods. To my disbelief, my comment gained traction. Users began responding to my reflections, others reached out, sharing their own stories of struggles within their communities. I felt something unfurl inside me, an unexpected connection, a sense of belonging created amid this realm of shared experiences. As the thread continued to grow, I found myself immersed in conversations that challenged my perspectives, ultimately stirring a mix of pride and fear, as I was both championing and critiquing a contentious subject I had once brushed off casually. Weeks passed as I continued engaging with the thread. Each comment felt like a thread weaving a larger tapestry of understanding and empathy, reminding me of how delicate our collective existence truly was. One comment stood out, however, a direct message from Stateless Hand, commending me for my perspective. Curious about the person behind the username, I hesitantly replied, and what unfolded next surprised me. We began exchanging daily messages, discussing everything from economics to our favorite Spotify playlists and, eventually, even personal matters. Their perspective was refreshingly grounded, as was the way they articulated the struggles they witnessed in their neck of the woods. They lived in a small town in Florida and described how the recent changes in trade policy had turned the local economy upside down, personally affecting their family's strawberry farm. Slowly, we moved from online exchanges to video calls, and I became familiar with the gentle cadence of Stateless Hand's voice, a balm on the digital abstraction that had initially defined our connection. However, I soon found myself wrestling with an unexpected dilemma. The more I saw into the eyes of the human behind the screen, the more troubled I felt by my initial stance on the tariffs. Our friendship deepened over shared lives, tales, and laughter, but every conversation also led to a struggle within me, as I felt more torn over the conflicting narratives surrounding our shared economics. In our moments together, it became clear how easily hearts could be caught between ideals and realities, especially when personal relationships began to weave themselves around such heavy topics. The tipping point came one evening as we video chatted. Stateless Hand was visibly upset, sharing how the local grocery store was about to close due to increased prices from tariffs, which had left the community desperate. My heart ached for them as I listened intently, feeling a whirlwind of emotions swirl within me. I dared to question the general consensus within our thread, measuring my words carefully out of respect for the friendship that had blossomed. Maybe, I began, my voice trembling slightly, the benefits of these tariffs aren't as straightforward as they seem. Could it harm more than it helps? A thoughtful silence filled the space between us, the storm outside echoing our unspoken fears. The conversation, which had once been light-hearted, was suddenly thrown into the depths of conflict and reflection. As the rain continued to pour, I understood that navigating disagreement was part of forging a connection, that grappling with different perspectives was an intrinsic part of understanding not only the world but also one another. In that moment of vulnerability, I recognized the importance of just listening, not to refute or defend, but to truly hear and find a common ground. Our discussions took on a new rhythm, blending our hopes and fears into a tapestry of understanding, one woven from personal stories and collective experiences. I'm not sure when it happened, but over the months that followed, the thread of our conversation transitioned from economics to sharing day-to-day moments, the silly selfie with my cat, or them showing off their latest harvest. With every photo exchange, we built a bridge, emphasizing our humanity amidst a sea of statistics and political discourse. By the time summer rolled around, I found myself planning a visit to their small town to meet face to face, the anticipation bubbling within me as the thought of witnessing what we'd spoken of for so long became a palpable reality. In the roundabout culmination of our journey, I came to realize how immensely important perspective can be. Through our tireless debates over tariffs, I found a friend, a confidant, and a way to understand the intricate connections we hold in our communities. When we eventually met, it felt as though we'd intertwined our lives in more ways than just a digital realm, but as friends sharing the weight of a world often burdened by misunderstanding. As we stood in the sun-soaked fields of their family farm, laughter echoing, I understood that no matter how much we differed, we were simply two humans trying to navigate an often daunting and tangled web of life. Walking side by side, I recognized that each unique voice, filled with its own struggles and joys, could amplify the sound of 1,000 unanswered questions, and together, we could find clarity in our shared complexities. And although I could never find a definitive answer to that mysterious original question about tariffs, I walked away with a new sense of purpose, To engage, embrace, and, above all, listen, because sometimes, it isn't about the answers we seek, but the connections we forge along the way. Update: a few months later, Stateless Hand and I are still in contact. We've become somewhat of an odd pair, a Chicago city dweller and a small-town farmer, but we share experiences and understanding that neither of us could find alone. And while discussions about local economic policies persist, those debates have shaped us into advocates for one another's narratives, a testament to how dialogue can unearth hidden treasures of empathy and friendship where least expected. It was a cool autumn day when I found myself sitting on the porch of my modest home, the remnants of summer fading and the leaves transforming into vibrant hues of gold and crimson. I clutched my phone tightly, lost in thought about my newfound friendship with Stateless Hand. Our conversations had shifted from local economic policies to something deeper, our childhoods, our dreams, and the life paths that led us to become who we are today. I always thought of myself as just an average city dweller, nestled in the comforting chaos of Chicago. But with Stateless Hand, I began to see the complexity behind the simplicity of a small-town life in the Midwest, the intimate knowledge a farmer had of the land, and how deeply rooted it was in community. Our video calls had become the highlight of my week, a lifeline that sought to connect the hustle of city life with the quietude of rural existence. This particular afternoon, I was waiting for our scheduled chat, reflecting on how our debates over tariffs had evolved. Where once we had argued over numbers and implications, we now shared stories of our families, our cultures, and the little things that made us tick. I could hear the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, and a soft pang of longing curled within me, reminding me of the way connection blossomed unexpectedly. That longing was suddenly interrupted as my phone chimed, pulling me back into the present. Stateless Hand's familiar face appeared on the screen, a mix of excitement and sincerity lighting up his features. "Hey! You won't believe this," he started, his Chicago accent weaving through his words. "I've created a community garden project. It's not just for food, but to bring our town together after the division caused by the tariffs." Intrigued, I leaned forward, eager to pull from his enthusiasm. He described how local farmers had banded together, setting aside their differences about policy and focusing instead on a mutual love for fresh produce and community ties. Each member contributed seeds, labor, or time, and, through sweat and collaboration, they cultivated a patch of earth that had once sat fallow. My heart warmed with admiration. Here was a man who had taken the contentious conversations and transformed them into an initiative that spoke of healing and unity. I couldn't help but share my own thoughts, recalling the varied community events in the city that sometimes felt lost in the multitude of people. "You know," I said, "I've always felt a bit disconnected in the city. It can be hard to find that sense of belonging." Stateless Hand nodded, his gaze earnest. "Yeah, I think we all feel that sometimes. But what you're doing in Chicago, it's essential. Your city might feel crowded, but every single person there has a story worth sharing. We should host a virtual exchange, a mingling of our worlds." A spark ignited within me at the thought. It was a splendid idea. We brainstormed ways to make it happen, planning to connect both our communities through shared experiences. Some were outlandish, others mundane, but all born from genuine excitement: an online cultural fair, a recipe swap, stories from the field and city alike, weaving together our narratives. As our call wound down, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't expected. Yes, our discussions had begun with tariffs, numbers, and policies, but they had morphed into something profound. We'd become advocates for each other's worlds, bridging the distances that separate life paths. I reflected on how dialogue had been a muscle we'd flexed together, building strength and resilience through the words we exchanged. Those tariffs were now but a backdrop to a growing tapestry of friendship and mutual respect, threads of understanding woven together through laughter and shared struggles. I hung up that evening, content with my little project in mind, confident that our stories would soon intertwine in ways that had never crossed my thoughts. And thus, as the sun slipped below the horizon, I welcomed the stars, knowing that both Stateless Hand and I were on a journey defined not by policy debates but by the bonds we formed and the understanding we nurtured as we embraced the beautiful complexity of our lives. As I sprawled on my couch later that night, clutching my phone in one hand and a steaming mug of herbal tea in the other, I felt a comforting warmth settle in my chest. The glow of the screen reflected the enthusiasm I had for this newfound friendship. Stateless Hand, whose real name was Chris, was as much a contrast to my life in bustling Chicago as the endless fields of corn were to the concrete skyline I had known my whole life. Yet, in our conversations, layers began to peel back, revealing shared dreams and anxieties hidden beneath the weight of our respective realities. Chris often shared his tales of the farm, the rhythm of the seasons, the bond he formed with the land and the animals, and the highs and lows of harvests over the years. I listened intently, my mind painting vivid images of the sun-kissed fields and golden sunsets that he described, feeling a tug of envy for the simplicity and connection he embraced. I opened up about my life too, recounting the frenetic pace of city life, the thrum of impatience that lived in the hearts of my neighbors, and the solitude often carved by crowded public transport. Our conversations began to evolve into a ritual. Every Wednesday evening, we would schedule a video call, each eagerly anticipating the chance to share our lives. With each session, I realized just how deeply I appreciated Chris's perspective on things I had previously taken for granted. One week, as we spoke about the complexities of our economies, I shared my frustration about the endless barrage of news on tariffs and policies. Chris listened patiently for a moment, before gently interjecting with an idea I hadn't considered, the idea that perhaps, in every policy debate, there lies a community, voices seeking to be heard, struggles wanting to be shared. It sparked a light in me. We were both entrenched in our worlds, unaware of how much we could learn from one another. As fall wrapped its chill around Chicago, I found myself yearning to visit Chris and his small-town farm. I proposed the idea during one of our calls, watching as his face broke into a wide grin. "You'd love it here," he said, excitement bubbling in his voice. "We're just harvesting pumpkins and planning for the winter months." The thought of stepping out of my urban existence and into a world where life echoed with the sounds of nature thrilled me. 2 weeks later, I was on a bus, the city shifting behind me like sand in an hourglass. I could feel the anticipation buzzing in my veins. When I finally arrived at Chris's farm, a sprawling landscape of earthy browns and golds opened before me, conjuring an awe that made me forget all the stress of my usual routine. He met me at the gate, his face beaming with enthusiasm and familiarity, as if we were old friends rather than recent acquaintances bound through screens and digital chats. We embraced, and it felt surreal. What unfolded over the next few days was a tapestry of experiences woven with genuine laughter, deep conversations, and moments of serene beauty amidst nature. I helped him in the fields, learning how to harvest pumpkins, and even got a taste of country cooking courtesy of one of his friends. Each evening, we'd sit around the fire pit, the crackling flames illuminating our faces as we reflected on the days gone by, how small-town worries mirrored city stress, how a failing crop could echo the financial struggles of an urban worker. As the visit drew to a close, I felt something shift within me, a deeper appreciation dawning. It was no longer just an exchange of ideas, it was a bridge spanning two worlds that often seem so divergent. I realized how vital these connections were, much like the necessary nutrients in soil that help crops flourish. By engaging with Chris and his stories, my own life felt richer, expanded under the warmth of friendship. When I returned to Chicago, the city felt different. The streets were familiar, yet now, they were laced with the memories of a place that had changed me, even if just a little. A month later, I sat in my favorite cafe, sipping coffee and scrolling through my social media feed when I noticed a new post from Chris about a local farmer's market he was launching. The idea thrilled me, and without a second thought, I texted him, offering to help promote it through my connections in the city. It was the least I could do for the deep impact he had made on my life. Chris responded with the same enthusiasm, and suddenly, what began as an unusual conversation about tariffs transformed into a collaboration that intertwined our worlds even further, a chance to showcase local produce to a city that often overlooked its roots. As I sit here reflecting on everything, I can't help but feel grateful for how a mere online discussion blossomed into a real friendship, one filled with laughter, empathy, and a shared understanding that transcends our differing lifestyles. It isn't just about tariffs, policies, or who benefits more. It's about how we can find pieces of ourselves in one another, about constructing communities, no matter how different our environments may be. And while my journey with Chris doesn't solely revolve around economic debates, it's an exploration of life's deeper connections, a reminder that sometimes, it's the people we least expect who help us heal, grow, and truly see the world. As I contemplate the beautiful complexity of our lives, I cannot wait to see where this new chapter takes us, what new intersections we'll find along the way, and what other friendships may blossom as we continue to embrace the journey ahead. My father's birthday dinner was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a celebration filled with laughter and shared memories, but as I sat there, the weight of unresolved grief rested heavily on my chest. It's funny how the three of us, my dad, my sister Sarah, and I, had always formed a tight-knit unit, yet recent events had begun to fracture that bond. Just 6 months had passed since I suffered a miscarriage, a time when my world turned gray, where joy felt like a distant memory, and the unwavering support I had hoped for from my family seemed, at best, insufficient. I had spent weeks preparing myself for this dinner, eager to distract my mind and feel a sense of normalcy again, but a knot began to twist in my stomach as soon as we arrived at the quaint little restaurant my dad loved. The walls were decorated with photographs from his past birthdays, capturing moments of bliss that now felt unbearably distant. As our waiter brought over the first round of drinks, I inhaled deeply, trying to soak in the laughter of others at nearby tables, the clinking of glasses ringing like a soft melody in my ears. My dad, with his warm eyes twinkling, regaled us with stories from his youth, tales of cross-country road trips and shenanigans with friends. I smiled and took sips of my wine, cherishing the moments of levity he brought, yet shadows loomed in my heart, blossoming with each passing minute. That's when I heard it, a quiet voice carrying through the room, sharp enough to slice through the cheerful hum of conversation. Sarah, seated just across from me, casually remarked to her partner, "Well, at least Mom didn't have to deal with a tiny grave this year." The words dropped heavily into the air, and for a moment, the world around me faded. My heart raced, and my fingers gripped the edge of the table as dread washed over me like bitter cold water. How could she say something so callous? The hurt of my loss bubbled up, intertwining with a complex blend of anger and disbelief. I had always considered Sarah my closest confidant, but now she felt like a stranger, one who didn't comprehend the weight of what I had been through or the sensitivity required when discussing grief. It took all my strength to maintain a facade of composure, but each shallow breath hinted at the storm brewing within me. The entire dinner suddenly felt unbearable, my father's laughter ringing hollow as myriad thoughts cascaded through my mind. I felt the familiar urge to flee, to escape the suffocating reality of my sister's insensitivity. Finally, unable to bear it any longer and desperate to shield myself from any further emotional assault, I stood up, excusing myself with a shaky voice. My dad's laughter dimmed, and an uneasy silence crept in as he looked up, confusion clouding his features. I hurried toward the restroom, each step feeling like an avalanche of regret crashing down on me, for leaving, for how my sister could be so ignorant of my pain, for what was supposed to be a celebration of my father's life morphing into a spotlight on my loss. Once inside the small, dimly lit restroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, trying to decipher the woman looking back. Anger flared like wildfire, and I told myself I was justified to feel this way. I reached for my phone, contemplating sending a message to my sister, maybe to explain how her comment had tangled my heart in knots. But each time I typed a word, it felt inadequate, like I was fumbling to convey a deep sadness that she may never understand. I left the restaurant, heart aching and burdened, and as I sat alone in my car, the muffled sounds of the joyful gathering faded into the night. I ruminated over my sister's words, wondering if I had truly overreacted. I drove home in silence, clutching the steering wheel tight, the road ahead blurring through tears. I tried to keep at bay. It wasn't until I got home that I found a sliver of calmness, the weight of the day beginning to lift, and I reflected on the necessity of self-care amidst the chaos. Maybe my response to Sarah was not just about her comment, it was my silent plea for recognition of my pain, a desperate call for empathy that I longed for, yet struggled to express. Weeks passed, and I hesitated, swirling in miscommunication and confusion. Then one quiet afternoon, I finally decided to reach out to Sarah. I texted her, opening the doors for a conversation that would lead us into fragile territory. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately, expressing her own vulnerability. Sarah confessed she had been scared to address my loss, unsure of how to support me, fearing she would say the wrong thing. In turn, I explained how her thoughtless comment had sent me spiraling, how grief could feel isolating, especially in the walls built between family. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Instead, it transformed into a delicate stitch, communication slowly weaving our hearts back together. We realized we had been struggling at opposite ends of the same spectrum, needing each other without knowing how to reach out. As for our father's birthday, I returned to our family dinners, hesitant yet hopeful, ready to make new memories, learning the ebb and flow of grief and joy intertwined. It wouldn't always be easy, but perhaps through understanding, even those heavy ties could strengthen our bond. A few months later, we even planned a gathering to honor my lost baby, a gentle way for us all to acknowledge the fragility of life together. It wasn't just about acknowledging my hurt anymore, it became a shared experience that drew us closer, nurturing the bond we once thought lost. This whole experience taught me a powerful lesson about the intricacies of grief. We can be both hurt and hurting without meaning to, and sometimes the simplest misstep can lead to the most profound realizations. In the end, we came to understand that healing is a journey best walked together, even when the path may be a bit rocky. As the weeks rolled on, my family and I began to reshape the focus of our gatherings, infusing them with stories about the loved ones we had lost and celebrating the lives we still had. Each meeting became a chapter in our collective healing, and slowly, we found joy in shared laughter and nostalgic recollections, all while allowing room for tears when they surfaced. It felt surreal at times, navigating the delicate balance between joy and sorrow. My sister would often reminisce about growing up, cracking jokes about our childhood antics, and I would join in, laughing until I forgot about the heavy ache nestled within my heart. Yet, with every joke, I was acutely aware of an underlying tension that lingered. Our grief was raw, and though we had found a semblance of healing, there were still unspoken words tethered to our experiences. One evening, after what had been a particularly lovely dinner filled with good food and laughter, I noticed my sister staring out the window, her brow furrowed in a way that suggested a silent battle was happening inside her. It was a moment of connection lost in translation, and somehow I knew that she was wrestling with her own guilt, her own questions about our shared experience of loss. Taking a deep breath, I asked her what was on her mind, and she hesitated before her voice came out as merely a whisper. "I can't believe how different life feels now. Do you think we'll ever get back to normal?" As she looked at me, vulnerability flickering in her eyes, I recognized the fear she held, fear that our family would remain fractured, struggling beneath the weight of absence. I reached for her hand, a simple gesture meant to convey solidarity, signaling that the pathway to normal was no longer our goal. Together, we were redefining what our family meant. In the days that followed, we made it a point to engage in small but meaningful rituals. We repurposed anniversaries of our losses into days of gratitude, where we would sit together, perhaps with a candle lit or a favorite photo framed between us, and recount stories of our loved ones, mirthful tales mixed with those easier to swallow that were steeped in love. My sister opened up more, sharing her own struggles with guilt and regret, angles of grief I hadn't seen before. Each conversation gradually eroded the walls we had built around our hearts. We remembered not just those who had left us but also acknowledged our shared humanity and the heavy burden it bore. Healing often felt like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but each shared moment brought us closer to the heart of what it meant to be family. My father, who had been notably quiet after my loss, appeared to appreciate this newfound dynamic, often chiming in with his own stories that nurtured the laughter in our home once again. He became a stalwart foundation beneath our feet, always encouraging us to lean on him when the weight of our sorrow became too heavy to bear alone. I learned that he, too, was navigating his grief in his own way, the quiet moments of reflection weaving together a narrative of strength and vulnerability that inspired me to keep pushing forward. As spring began to emerge with its floral blooms, glimmers of hope sparkled amidst our healing. I had always held the belief that moments of shared vulnerability could bind us closer together, and my experience had only reinforced that notion. The rocky path I had trekked with my sister transformed into vibrant hues of compassion. However, it wasn't until one particular afternoon, while we were sipping coffee on the porch, that I felt we had truly turned a corner. "You know," my sister said, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her cup, "I think about the baby often. I still grieve, but it feels different now. It's more about remembering than just sadness." Those words settled around us like a gentle breeze, palpable yet comforting as we both acknowledged the bittersweet nature of our memories. By this point, I realized healing wasn't a linear path but rather an intricate tapestry of emotions, perspectives, and connections. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, casting hues of gold across the landscape, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for where we were. This persistent journey teased out the best of us, the lessons learned, the love rekindled, and bonds fortified through shared experiences of grief and love. Looking back now, I understand that acknowledging our individual and collective hurt was just the beginning. It was essential to honor those we lost, yet it was equally pivotal to foster life in our own hearts while doing so. As I reflect on my journey, I find comfort in knowing that while the scars may never completely fade, they have transformed into marks of love, reminders of life's fragility that allowed us to grow as individuals and as a family. Healing becomes a narrative constantly rewritten, just as our love continues to bloom, bright and enduring, a cycle of remembrance and connection that honors not just the lost but also those still here, cherishing every moment we share together. Update: a few months later, when the fall leaves began to blanket the ground, my sister and I found ourselves volunteering at a local charity that supported families who had experienced loss. We thought perhaps we could bring some comfort to others navigating similar paths, and in doing so, strengthened our bond even further. Each story shared was a reminder of our resilience, proving that together, we were not only bereaved but beautifully alive, creating new pages for the chapters that lay ahead. The crisp air of autumn wrapped around us like a soft blanket as I walked alongside my sister, Emma, through the bustling community center. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg wafted from the nearby kitchen, where volunteers were preparing a feast for the families we hoped to support. I looked at Emma, her hair dancing in the light breeze, and felt a warmth blossom in my heart. It was hard to believe how much had changed since that fateful birthday dinner, where everything had unraveled in a flash of pain and misunderstanding. The air felt lighter now, like the weight of grief had transformed into something we could carry together. Volunteering became a sacred ritual for us, not just a service to others, but a space for our own healing. Each week, we would share stories with those who understood our journey, laughing, crying, and sometimes sitting in contemplative silence. It was in these moments, surrounded by people clinging to hope amidst their sorrow, that we found clarity in our suffering. One evening, after we had helped set up the space for a support group meeting, Emma turned to me with that familiar, mischievous glint in her eye. She suggested we create a special gratitude wall, a place where we could post notes of appreciation for the little things in life, like the laughter shared over coffee, or the warmth of a hug on a cold day. I loved this idea. It felt like we were taking our grief and turning it into something beautiful, offering it to others as a light guiding them through their darkest moments. Days turned into weeks, and soon we were consumed by an unexpected project, a charity event that would not only raise funds but also spread awareness about the often taboo subject of baby loss. Emma and I brainstormed passionately over cups of tea, envisioning a candlelight vigil to honor those we had lost and to celebrate the lives still being lived. I felt a flutter of excitement. It was empowering to take control of our sorrow, to transform it into a platform that could help others. I reached out to potential speakers, healing coaches, and even local artists who had experienced similar losses, inviting them to share their stories and talents. Our community embraced the idea, gathering behind us, and soon what was once a simple concept blossomed into an event that rippled throughout the town. The day of the vigil arrived, and as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, I stood at the forefront of a small group, my heart racing with anticipation. Emma squeezed my hand and smiled, a reassuring gesture that brought me comfort. I spoke openly about our journey, about how we had walked through fire only to emerge stronger, and it felt cathartic to release our story into the world. As candles flickered to life, their gentle flames reflecting in the eyes of those gathered, I felt a profound sense of connection, no longer alone in my sorrow, but part of something much greater. Each shared remembrance, each tear, and each smile became a thread weaving us together, reminding me that grief, while isolating, could also create a community of love and understanding. After the event, as we cleaned up and started to close the space for the night, Emma surprised me with a warm hug. "I didn't think we could turn our sadness into something so beautiful," she said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "But look at what we did." I nodded, overwhelmed with emotion. The evening had been a testament to resilience, not just ours but of everyone who had braved their own storms. Just when I thought I couldn't feel more connected to Emma, I realized the shared labor of love had sewn us closer, and the fragile harmony we had nurtured gave me hope with deep, unwavering roots. As the days faded into the past, I sometimes found myself reflecting quietly in my room, on the journey that had led me to this moment. It was strange how the air around us seemed to shimmer now, imbued with a sense of possibility and healing. I understood now that while the loss would always be a part of me, it no longer defined my narrative. Instead, it underscored my resilience and illuminated the importance of love and community. Update: a few months later, as winter cloaked the world in white, I received a letter from one of the families we had helped through the charity event. The mother expressed gratitude so heartfelt it felt as though she had reached into my chest to tug at my heartstrings. She informed me that they named their newborn daughter after the baby I had lost. Somehow, those words wove through my grief and into a new, hopeful chapter. I realized that I, too, was creating life anew, forging connections that honored the past while celebrating the present. It brought me comfort to know that even amid loss, love was still growing, binding us all in a beautiful tapestry of remembrance and hope. And so, as the world outside darkened early, I wrapped myself in a blanket of warmth and possibility, letting sleep find me with a heart full of love, knowing that together with Emma, we were brightening the path for others, and ourselves, in this ever-evolving journey of life.